Chapter 7, The Wilderness Part 2. We spent another hour stalking the moss fields in silence. I moved more slowly now, every step thick with the weight of the earlier mistake. The creature had gotten away, wounded, but not ours. My shoulder still burned from where it knocked me down. Brask had covered our retreat without a word of blame, but that somehow made it worse. Marcy hadn't said anything either, though her look lingered a little longer than usual when I lagged behind. Sweat stung my eyes. The field was no cooler than before, but something about the air felt heavier. Every movement through the stalks left trails of pollen curling into the thick light, and each inhale tasted of rust and bitter growth. The moss here wasn't a carpet, it was a sea. And we were three small boats, moving with care. Brask led. He sniffed the wind constantly, low and steady, his ears flicking now and then as if picking up signals we couldn't hear. Marcy trailed at the back, her robes pulled tight and her spear always ready. I stayed between them. No more sail beasts. No motion except our own. Just the sound of our steps in the spongy overgrowth and the whistle of distant vents coughing out heat in slow intervals. I tried not to look up. The god rays had begun to thin. Where they once had pierced downward like massive stage lights, they now scattered, warped through layers of collapsing ducts and diffusers. Instead of fading, the light had fractured. Long, soft-edged ellipses arced across the moss and broken walls, casting shapes that moved when they shouldn't. It was the kind of trick that pulled at your thoughts. Like something watching from behind a curtain that wasn't there. We reached a rise in the terrain, not exactly a hill, but a bulge in the moss where the plates beneath must have cracked and shifted. The rope trail was just ahead. One thick line dangled from the upper tier. Sunlight kissed its length and gold. Marcy sighed, already reaching for her harness clip. Almost there. If we move quick we can still make camp before full dark. Brask grunted in agreement. He was already at the rope, paws on the low wall we'd climbed down from earlier in the day. I stopped walking. Something was wrong. Not a sound. Not a smell. Just wrong. Guys? I said, hesitant. We can't go that way. No, I said, louder. We can't go that way. I can explain it, it's not a maybe though. We just can't, okay? Marcy groaned behind me. Come on, Everett. Don't start this now. You want to get stuck out here overnight? I looked between them, frustration welling in my throat. Listen to me. I don't know how I know, but I do. That way is bad. Wrong. Dangerous. Something's there. They both stared. Brask narrowed his eyes, sniffing the air again. Then he paused. Could be a compass thing, he said, tone suddenly more serious. Marcy blinked. Wait, really? Like how lanterns can ward things off? But this is intuition? Or bait, Brask muttered. Could be a lure. One of the thought twisters. He sniffed again. Harder this time. Marcy fidgeted with her gloves. Her eyes darted between me and Brask. Do we trust it? If Everett's right and it's compass sense, we'd be walking into something awful. But if it's not, Brask, we'd be stuck out here in full dark. Brask growled low in his throat. Not at me. Not at her. Just at the situation. He turned toward the rope, took a few steps forward, and muttered, I will check it. He was up the wall in seconds. Despite his bulk, Brask moved like liquid over uneven terrain. He sniffed the rope, scanned the edge of the overhang. He leaned forward. Then he froze. I saw it a second too late. A blur. A net of motion struck from the side, it was too fast, too quiet. Brask bellowed and dropped, claws out. He didn't fall. He dove off the stair cliff, using the rope and his muscles to break the fall. A beast covered in spines struck the edge of the wall where he had just been. Its neck flared out, fibers twitching like a living radar dish. Its tendrils rose from its spine and lashed through the air, tasting. I only saw it clearly for half a second before Brask hit the moss beside us and rolled. Run! He barked. We obeyed, no time to think. Marcy was already in motion, spear drawn, but she didn't try to fight. The moss slowed our pace, made every step feel like pulling out of sand. I glanced back once and saw the beast's rear, its spine undulating like a serpent, testing the edge of the light. We ducked under an old girder and followed a half-sunken trench, the moss thinner here, the air hotter. My legs ached from the uneven terrain. My shoulder screamed with the memory of being slammed earlier. Still, we didn't stop. Only when the wall of the sector sloped in again did Brask finally call a halt. He sniffed the air, scanned the upper ridge. Nothing followed. He slumped against a leaning pillar and exhaled. His side bled where the beast had struck him. That was close, Marcy said, panting. Brask nodded once. Monk's feeling was right. They both looked at me. No blame. Just tired gratitude. I didn't answer. I was still listening to my instincts. They weren't quiet yet. I felt like everything was on the edge of going wrong, but I couldn't place it. That cliff of dread I'd felt before had vanished, replaced by a crawling itch behind my ears. A dull pressure like anticipation turned sour. I felt like everything was on the edge of going wrong, but I couldn't place it. That cliff of dread I'd felt before had vanished, replaced by a crawling itch behind my ears. A dull pressure like anticipation turned sour. Parthosia did not go still without reason. We waited until our breath came back. Brask was the first to speak. "We can still make it back to camp tonight, yes? We will just have to walk in full dark." Marcy shot him a look. Her face said everything before she even opened her mouth. "Brask, are you crazy? We have a newbie on our tail and we're in a crust sector. How far up is the build layer? This isn't a cave. This is an open field. Terrain like this in dark? There are far too many angles of attack. We would be sitting in the open blind." Brask sniffed, dismissive. "What choice do we have? All the reasons you listed are why we should not argue and press to safety. Yes? Better than staying exposed." She shook her head. "Come on, Brask. You know I can get us inside a block shell or a collapsed corner room. You want to move blind in moss this thick? We don't have Hannah anymore. We can't just barrel through nightfall and hope nothing hears." I cleared my throat. "Wait. I have an idea. I can do a ritual to decide this. Just give me a minute, cover me." Brask narrowed his eyes but didn't speak. Marcy hesitated, mouth half open to argue, but I was already at my pack, pulling out the wrapped cloth with my basic ritual kit inside. It felt stupid, or maybe just risky. A few years ago, back home, I wouldn't have been caught dead fumbling around with something like this. But here, it was real. Rituals worked. You just had to ask the right questions. And survive the answer. I began unpacking the kit, trying not to let my hands shake. The moss had a way of muffling sound, so even the click of my metal components and the scrape of wax cord against my gloves felt too loud. Marcy finally broke the silence. "You sure this is a good idea, Everett? You know what kind of energy this gives off, right?" Brask growled in warning. "Hurry, Monk. We do not have time to waste. Things that grant death far worse than the church's collar will come crawling out after sundown." I nodded, brow tight. I placed the pendulum at the center of a coil of wire and chalked a small glyph beneath it. Nothing fancy. Just a hinge question. I focused. Which of their paths leads to safety? Not who is right, not who is smarter. We needed safety. I pulled my breath low. Felt the ache of my timer ticking. My eyes burned from the strain, but I didn't close them. I wanted to watch the pendulum. It started to swing. Not randomly. Not chaotically. It pulled straight toward Marcy. I exhaled hard. The tension in my chest loosened, but only slightly. Marcy stepped forward. "Me, then. You sure?" The pendulum was still swaying. "That's the answer," I said. Brask grunted. Not disagreeing. Not agreeing. Just recalibrating. "Then we move fast," he said. "Find your door, Marcy. Keep us low." She didn't waste time arguing. Just turned on her heel and began leading us into the folds of broken moss and collapsed structure. I packed my ritual tools in silence, hard hammering. It had worked. We raced behind Marcy, driven by instinct more than strategy. The moss hissed beneath our boots as we tore across it, leaving an obvious trail of spores and torn stalks in our wake. I didn't care, and neither did we. The light was thinning, not fading in a normal way, but collapsing in on itself, curling and fracturing as if whatever held it up was buckling under the weight of the day. Ahead, rising like a crooked tooth from the flesh of Parthosia, was the outcropping. A building, or the memory of one. It wasn't straight. It wasn't even sane. Like a brutalist tower grown too fast and at the wrong angle, it leaned hard to one side, its weight deforming the layers around it. I thought of some skyscraper from Earth trying to punch its way through the strata only to get stuck halfway. A parody of design, half swallowed by the terrain it assaulted. We closed the gap quickly, feet pounding through the crust and lichen. Spores flaked into the air in clouds behind us. My lungs burned. My legs begged for rest. My body wasn't built for this. Not yet. Not like Brask or Marcy. But adrenaline has a way of ignoring logic. As we reached the structure, I saw that the windows, if they were windows, weren't placed with any architectural logic. Some were massive gaps 20 feet in the air. Others were pinholes at ankle height. There were no doorways I could see, no human-scale entry points. It was as if the creators had guessed what humans might need based only on rumor. "There!" Marcy called, pointing to a broken seam into a hallway halfway up a collapsed slope of buckled concrete. Brask didn't argue. He planted his feet and braced. Marcy ran forward, planted a boot on his knee, and heaved herself up. She caught the edge, grunted, then turned to offer a hand. I followed, awkward but determined. Brask was strong. My foot barely touched his arm before I was up and scrabbling with Marcy's help. We turned in sync and reached down. Brask jumped. We caught his forearms and dragged him in, the last of the outer light spilling through the angled gap like dying fire. Then it was gone. Just us in the dark. Inside, the scale shifted. No more impossible window placement. Now it felt like the builders had suddenly remembered humanity existed and tried to accommodate. The hallway was tall but walkable. A narrow beam of Brask's flashlight stabbed into the dark, followed by a second from Marcy. He passed one to me. It hummed in my grip. Cold metal. No battery port. Just a button. The light that came out was too clean, too precise, a surgical beam that cut the dark rather than illuminating it. But it still felt like holding a spotlight. We moved together into the hall. The incline sloped upward, slow and steady. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead, a coffin-shaped tunnel of smooth concrete. No markings. No signage. Only the press of old dust and the smell of air that had not been moved in years. It reminded me of those YouTube videos from Egypt, people crawling through pyramid shafts. Except this wasn't built by hands. This was something else. As if purpose had decayed over time until only shape remained. We climbed. Eventually, the hall forked. Then forked again. Angles went wrong. Floors became walls. We hit what looked like a stairwell, but it looped back into itself. The more we walked, the more I felt the geometry fighting us. "We need a printed corridor," Brask growled, low and focused. "We cannot get lost in this." "Yes?" Marcy swept her beam across a series of odd alcoves. I know. I'm looking for circuits. Mechanics. Something that isn't just poured stone. This was a bad pick, okay? Luck of the draw." Brask said nothing. He didn't have to. The worry was there in his ears and the stiffness in his shoulders. Marcy turned to me. "You got another hunch in you, compass boy?" I was already trying. That earlier feeling, the one thread of certainty that had pulled us off the death path before I reached for it again. Harder this time. I focused until the heat of the beam made sweat crawl down my temples. Nothing. Just walls. Then something flared. A prick of light in the mind. Like a thread plucked tight in a dark room. I knew the direction. "This way," I said, already moving. Neither of them questioned it. Not this time. We turned left, then down. Then right again. Through a triangular arch that shouldn't have led anywhere and yet did. The shape of the place began to blur. Logic gave way to instinct. I didn't think. I just felt. Up a narrow spine of stairs that ended in a door with no handle. Marcy pressed her palm flat against it, and her eyes narrowed in concentration. The circuitry along her arms pulsed, then bloomed. Fine threads of metal and silicon burst like living veins from beneath her skin, trailing down her wrist and fingers. The cords snaked into the narrow seams around the door, merging with the dead panel like a parasite finding its host. There was a long moment of tension. Then a click, soft and final. The door hissed inward. We stepped into something that looked like a break room. Bent steel benches. A torn screen on one wall, still glowing faintly with a blue diagnostic circle. This was tech. Real tech. Human adjacent. Marcy exhaled in relief. "A cogently printed corridor," she said. "We can bed down here." Brask nodded, already inspecting the corners. I shut the door behind us. It locked with a sound I couldn't place. The inside of the room was lit by one odd console screen flickering like an old CRT, casting everything in a ghostly blue glow. Whatever hope I had felt was already draining out of me, replaced with something more primal. Just because we were alone didn't mean we were safe. We caught our breath. No one spoke. My eyes wandered, tracing the seams in the walls, the strange furniture bolted in impossible orientations. Then Brask let out a low grunt and pointed to a black rectangle along the far wall. "Window," he said, voice flat. "Don't go near it." Outside, the void of the Parthosian dark pressed up against the glass. It wasn't just absence of light. It had depth. Weight. Like something waiting to seep in. I nodded, but my eyes were drawn instead to the console. That flickering blue screen. It pulsed in rhythm, like a warning beacon. I stepped closer. The screen wasn't stable. It blinked and twitched, letters slowly printing themselves one after another, like an old hard drive waking up for the first time in decades. Then the words formed a pattern, then stanzas, then something else. Poetry. Or scripture. Or madness. It read. I was sent forth from the power. And I have come to those who reflect upon me. And I have been found among those who seek after me. Look upon me, you who reflect upon me. And you hearers, hear me. You who are waiting for me, take me to yourselves. And do not banish me from your sight. And do not make your voice hate me, nor your hearing. Do not be ignorant of me anywhere or any time. Be on your guard. Do not be ignorant of me. For I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. I am the members of my mother. I am the barren one. And many are her sons. I am she whose wedding is great. And I have not taken a husband. I am the midwife and she who does not bear. I am the solace of my labor pains. I am the bride and the bridegroom. And it is my husband who begot me. I am the mother of my father. And the sister of my husband. And he is my offspring. I am the slave of him who prepared me. I am the ruler of my offspring. But he is the one who begot me before the time on a birthday. And he is my offspring in due time. And my power is from him. I am the staff of his power in his youth. And he is the rod of my old age. And whatever he wills happens to me. I am the silence that is incomprehensible. And the idea whose remembrance is frequent. I am the voice whose sound is manifold. And the word whose appearance is multiple. I am the utterance of my name. Why, you who hate me, do you love me? And hate those who love me? You who deny me, confess me. And you who confess me, deny me. You who tell the truth about me, lie about me. And you who have lied about me, tell the truth about me. You who know me, be ignorant of me. And those who have not known me, let them know me. For I am knowledge and ignorance. I am shame and boldness. I am shameless, I am ashamed. I am strength and I am fear. I am war and peace. Give heed to me. I am the one who is disgraced and the great one. Give heed to my poverty and my wealth. Do not be arrogant to me when I am cast out upon terra. And you will find me in those that are to come. And do not look upon me on the dung heap. Nor go and leave me cast out. And you will find me in the kingdoms. And do not look upon me when I am cast out among those who are disgraced and in the least places. Nor laugh at me. And do not cast me out among those who are slain in violence. But I am compassionate and I am cruel. Be on your guard. Do not hate my obedience. And do not love my self-control. In my weakness, do not forsake me. And do not be afraid of my power. For why do you despise my fear? And curse my pride? But I am she who exists in all fears. And strength in trembling. I am she who is weak. And I am well in a pleasant place. I am senseless and I am wise. Why have you hated me in your counsels? For I shall be silent among those who are silent. And I shall appear and speak. Why then have you hated me, you Parthosians? Because I am a barbarian among the barbarians? For I am the wisdom of the Parthosians. And the knowledge of the barbarians. I am the judgment of the Parthosians and of the barbarians. I am the one whose image is great in old Kenoma. And the one who has no image among the barbarians. I am the one who has been hated everywhere. And who has been loved everywhere. I am the one whom they call life. And you have called death. I am the one whom they call law. And you have called lawlessness. I am the one whom you have pursued. And I am the one whom you have seized. I am the one whom you have scattered. And you have gathered me together. I am the one before whom you have been ashamed. And you have been shameless to me. I am she who does not keep festival. And I am she whose festivals are many. I am godless. And I am the one whose God is great. I am the one whom you have reflected upon. And you have scorned me. I am unlearned. And they learn from me. I am the one that you have despised. And you reflect upon me. I am the one whom you have hidden from. And you appear to me. But whenever you hide yourselves, I myself will appear. For whenever you appear, I myself will hide from you. Those who have, to it, senselessly, take me, understanding, from grief. And take me to yourselves from understanding and grief. And take me to yourselves from places that are ugly and in ruin. And rob from those which are good even though in ugliness. Out of shame, take me to yourselves shamelessly. And out of shamelessness and shame, upbraid my members in yourselves. And come forward to me, you who know me. And you who know my members. And establish the great ones among the small first creatures. Come forward to childhood. And do not despise it because it is small and it is little. And do not turn away greatnesses in some parts from the smallnesses. For the smallnesses are known from the greatnesses. Why do you curse me and honor me? You have been wounded and you have had mercy. Do not separate me from the first ones whom you have known. And do not cast anyone out nor turn anyone away. Turn you away and, no, him not. What is mine? I know the first ones and those after them know me. But I am the mind of, and the rest of. I am the knowledge of my inquiry. And the finding of those who seek after me. And the command of those who ask of me. And the power of the powers in my knowledge. Of the angels, who have been sent at my word. And of gods in their seasons by my counsel. And of spirits of every man who exists with me. And of women who dwell within me. I am the one who is honored, and who is praised. And who is despised scornfully. I am peace. And war has come because of me. And I am an alien and a citizen. I am the substance and the one who is no substance. Those who are without association with me are ignorant of me. And those who are in my substance are the ones who know me. Those who are close to me have been ignorant of me. And those who are far away from me are the ones who have known me. On the day when I am close to you, you are far away from me. And on the day when I am far away from you, I am close to you. I am, within. I am, of the natures. I am, of the creation of the spirits. Request of the souls. I am controlling the uncontrollable. I am the union and the dissolution. I am the abiding and I am the dissolution. I am the one below. And they come up to me. I am the judgment and the acquittal. I am sinless. And the root of sin derives from me. I am lust in, outward, appearance. And interior self-control exists within me. I am the hearing which is attainable to everyone. And the speech which cannot be grasped. I am a mute who does not speak. And great is my multitude of words. Hear me in gentleness, and learn of me in roughness. I am she who cries out. And I am cast forth upon the face of the soil. I prepare the bread in my mind within. I am the knowledge of my name. I am the one who cries out. And I listen. I appear and, walk in, seal of my. I am, the defense. I am the one who is called truth. And iniquity. You honor me, and you whisper against me. You who are vanquished, judge them who vanquish you. Before they give judgment against you. Because the judge and partiality exist in you. If you are condemned by this one, who will acquit you? Or, if you are acquitted by him, who will be able to detain you? For what is inside of you is what is outside of you. And the one who fashions you on the outside is the one who shaped the inside of you. And what you see outside of you, you see inside of you. It is visible and it is your garment. Hear me, you hearers. And learn of my words, you who know me. I am the hearing that is attainable to everything. I am the speech that cannot be grasped. I am the name of the sound. And the sound of the name. I am the sign of the letter. And the designation of the division. And I? Light. Hearers, to you. The great power. And, will not move the name to the one who created me. And I will speak his name. Look then at his words. And all the writings which have been completed. Give heed then, you hearers. And you also, the angels and those who have been sent. And you spirits who have risen from the dead. For I am the one who alone exists. And I have no one who will judge me. For many are the pleasant forms which exist in numerous sins. And incontinencies. And disgraceful passions. And fleeting pleasures. Which men embrace until they become sober. And go up to their resting place. And they will find me there. And they will live. And they will not die again. By the time I finished reading it, I realized I wasn't alone. Brask and Marcy were both peering over my shoulder, eyes fixed to the screen with unreadable expressions. Brask was the first to speak. This ancient gibberish always makes my head hurt. Don't stare too long, young monk. It is doing something to your mind. He wasn't wrong. I could feel something unspooling behind my eyes. Not pain. Not yet. Just a slow drift into something else. Something old. Chapter 8, Interlude, Keel Authority. Far, far above the moss fields and broken corridors of the crust sector, the 8 moons of Parthosia hung in a rare convergence. Their slow orbit, invisible to the layman as anything more than an odd brightness in the sky, marked the closing of a cycle that had not repeated in 333 years. Their light, cold and harsh as surgical glass, cast long ridged shadows across the surface of the Keel Authority ziggurat, rising black and jagged above the hive towers of its sector. And upon that apex, high in the stratosphere where oxygen thinned and power pulsed raw, stood a weeping mass. He wore no human silhouette. That form had long since given way. What remained bore only the faintest suggestion of the man he had once been, some 1,000 years ago when the first packs were struck and the blood of the old kings ran bright on the slates. His current form a latticework of tendons, coiled metal sinew, and glass-veined limbs, he rose like a sculpture of industry and suffering, each motion revealing the impossible grace of a being touched by true gnosis. He had waited for this night since the last occurrence, patient as ever. Each calculated breath, each elongated blink of his lateral vision organs, had measured the moonrise until it came. Now, beneath their crossing shadows, the ritual could begin. Of weeping mass raised a single appendage, but one of many. It was not a hand, not anymore, but a crown-grafted interface of spiraled flesh and optical brass. Below him, at the foot of the black stone dais, his head contract priest saw the signal and dropped to both knees. The sound of bone on stone echoed like a drumbeat. Then the priest screamed, and it was not in pain, but in adulation, and the noise was taken up by the 1,000 debt choirs that lined the steps. They wailed. Bound in copper wire and shivering devotion, the penitents shrieked their burden hymn through masks of wax and clay. They wailed not for release, but to honor the weight they bore. They had been bred for this purpose. Some had been altered to be good singers. Others merely loud. None would survive the night. Of weeping mass did not look at them. They were not his concern and far beneath the honor of his gaze. His attention remained fixed on the upper heavens, his many sensory organs tracking the drift of pale orbitals as they moved into convergence. Behind him, the platforms opened. Chambers like petals peeled back from the ziggurats under structure, revealing the next layer of the ritual engine, the sacrifices. 900,000, drawn from across the hive. Some chosen. Some taken. All now stripped bare and held in conveyor-like belts of waxed stone and meat hooks, gliding silently into position. Each step they were moved forward, something was extracted. Hair. Teeth. Blood. All fuel for what would come next. When they reached the executioner tiers, the high contract warlocks, they were naked save for their packed inked skin and the metal blades embedded in their palms. They moved in precise rhythm. This was not mere slaughter. This was symphony of the highest of devotion. Blood met stone and the stone drank deep. The ziggurat became a vein. Runnels cut into its body lit with sigils too old to read. They drank the sacrifice, through mysticism wrapped through packed state logic, flowing backward through capillary paths and seared invocation lines etched into the framework of the ziggurat itself. Each screaming death was recorded, witnessed, indexed by the binding of the ritual. The debt was not forgiven, for it was the currency of one of the triumvirate. Of weeping mass stepped into the stream. It was today again that he would complete one of his grand rituals, one thought lost to his contract priests and corporate warlocks. Of weeping mass had of course only kept the secrets to himself. His family, disdain rose in his enlightened mind when forced to think of them more than twice in one day, but he concluded that thought, his family were greedy parasites that had dragged the Keel name through the dirt and caused the ennui. The pettiness of the memory pleased him almost as much as the power he drew from the ritual. Where the others were careful not to break the lines, he plunged his feet directly into the arterial cut of the sacrifice. His many limbs cracked and rearranged to allow it. With each heartbeat of the dying thousands, he grew taller, his form resonating with the collected pain. The cilia marks along his interior frame pulsed blue-black. He opened his mouth, not the one used for speaking, but the one used for remembering, and intoned the names of the triumvirate. The sky responded, not with obedience but with reluctance, as if the triumvirate still weighed whether he was worthy to glimpse their path. Lightning carved itself across the upper stratosphere without storm, each arc a veined outline of things greater than memory. His back stiffened at the pressure of it. It was a reply, yes, but not a welcoming one. Still, he savored it. To have earned even that much was more than any of his so-called kin had managed. The triumvirate remembered him. They had not answered the others. They had not answered the board. They had answered of weeping mass. Lightning without storm. Smoke without fire. Heat without source. The moons trembled in their paths. Not visibly, not to the human eye. But of weeping mass could feel it. Their gravity softened. Their song grew louder. A hum, ancient and perfect, harmonized with the death cries below. His ziggurat shuddered with the power of it. The hive would feel the quake, but none would understand its source. He raised all of his arms. Below, the priests cut faster. Of weeping mass reached inward, dragging across the hidden lattice of his being, and exposed his true altar, the memory matrix of his original body, still coated in wetware at the core of his spinal mass. It ached to be seen. But it was necessary. The ritual demanded he bear himself to the triumvirate. He cast the final word into the blood. It was not a word humans could speak, or even hear. But it echoed. Through the dark. Through the maze of Parthosia. Through the walls of the Keel's holdings. Through the memory of what the Keel family had once been. A tremor passed through the hive. Lights failed. Locks disengaged. Elsewhere, machines paused as if in prayer. A weeping mass knew this was only the first step. Tonight, the moons would bleed. Far across the equatorial oceans of Terra, far beyond the holdfast walls of Parthosia or the clattering ziggurats of the Keel Authority, a continent slept. Its name had been scrubbed from most of the networked systems in use across the planetary crust. What old records remained buried beneath phonetic cipher or jurisdictional irrelevance? Few ships passed overhead. Fewer still landed. No one remembered who it belonged to. But in the sand-choked valleys of its interior, deep under the crust of that old continent, Canoma and its roots, there was still power. In the shell of a forgotten facility, ancient systems stirred. The first flicker was small. A relay, halfway between a sensor mast and a signal mirror, blinked to life for the first time in centuries. Then another. Then 37 in sequence. Dust and time sloughed from housings. Rust gave way to strain. The chain of pulse stations reconnected like nerves relacing a spine. Beneath them, embedded into the strata itself, an observation spire finished its long slumber. Power returned in staggered intervals, swelling from one core into hundreds. Thousands of dormant subroutines logged their wake cycles and began to crawl. The city stirred. None had entered its walls since the last day of the Moonlight Wars. It had not fallen. It had not been conquered. It had simply stopped. An empire unplugged from the cycle of history and allowed to ossify in secrecy. But that had never meant it was empty. They had simply waited. Now, their monitors had detected something. Not one ritual. Not a single breach. But thousands. Across the outer shells. A wave of invocation crawling across the world. In the deepest level of the city, inside a command chamber whose central interface had not been touched by human hands in 8 generations, a man awoke. Or something shaped like a man. He coughed dust from his throat and stood. The joints of his legs sounded like splitting tree bark. There were no alerts. No klaxons. Just lights coming online and a map scrolling itself across the wall. The moons had bled. The surface had changed. And the lattice had begun to hum. Call the towers, he rasped. Call all of them. Technicians who had not spoken aloud in decades came from their slumber cubicles. Bodies more scarred than flesh marched to cold terminals and booted code systems that ran on architectures now considered cursed. A long-dead science began to breathe again. Over the next hour, lights returned to the towers. The walls powered. The citadel breathed. The king of Kenoma was awake. And he had seen a weeping mess, and through him, the flaring outlines of a ritual not meant to be seen again. The transgressions of the triumvirate flickered across the ancient screens, encoded in wavelengths not used by any living power. Kenoma's king had seen the marks of their attention, the toll of their demands, their silence, their favor, their blood-soaked balance sheets. The triumvirate were remnants of a system that had outlived its cost, and still it collected. Still it fed. Men like of weeping mass chased echoes, and in doing so, multiplied the debts. The we would continue as it rightfully should, and then the rightful dreamer, his true love, can finally end this hellish nightmare. Chapter 9, The Wilderness Part 3. I had barely a second to react. Brask waved off my scanning without a word, but Marcy gave me a long, odd look when I stared too long at the pulsing blue terminal. The console flickered like an old CRT and hummed with a deep, static presence beneath the screen. Glowing text scrolled endlessly through dust, like a sermon written for no one and still read aloud for centuries. We kept quiet. The silence inside that ruin was nothing like the stillness of our vent camp. Outside, the crushed plains whispered in a way that was not gentle. It was not wind, it was combat, the hunt sounds and echoes of things I did not want to learn the shape of. As we moved closer to the moss fields, I understood why we buried our food so far from camp, why we kept light used to a minimum, and why we built the camp in a warped iron vent shaft instead of out in the open where the heat soaked into bone. From the long black window at the far end of the ruin, just a void when you glanced at it, sometimes light bloomed. Bioluminescence. Reflection. The oily gleam of moving eyes watching back. I didn't want to look, yet my eyes kept drifting back anyway. My thoughts slid. Even with the unease curling up my spine, I wanted to look. I didn't know why. Some dumb, terrible part of me just wanted to see what was watching. I took the second watch. Alone. Sitting in a box of cold dark with nothing but the pulsing blue console and the occasional shuddering creak of the structure adjusting itself to stress. I was shaking when they woke me for it. Sleep still pulled at my muscles, Stress drunk and low in the blood. I blinked and saw overlays. Understanding gained, danger sense, all knowledge has consequences. Then another. Please add more to the pile. And then. Understanding gained, ocular nerve gland, all knowledge has consequences. Please add more to the pile. The message settled into me with a popping sensation. Not in the ears. Deeper. A wet pulse in the brainstem. My jaw ached. My neck ticked with phantom heat. When I finally opened my eyes again, fully this time, everything had changed. My vision wasn't sharper. It wasn't light sensitive. It was just still there. Even where it shouldn't have been. It was like the flashlight memory clung to my skull. Like every object I'd seen earlier in the day was outlined in remembered shadow. I could close my eyes and still walk the room. Brask must have noticed something in my expression because he knelt beside me and pressed 2 fingers to my temple, then pointed to my eyes. "You okay, Monk?" I nodded. I didn't say anything. I took the little timer puck from him. It was our makeshift watch relay and felt the low, rhythmic thrum in its plastic shell. Just like waiting on a restaurant table back home. Back when there had been tables and hot home-cooked food. The room felt colder than before. My legs folded beneath me. I drew my pack close, wrapped my arms in my rope for warmth, and sat with the weight of exhaustion settling in. It didn't take long before the faint scratching began outside. It was subtle. Not like claws. More like brushes. Like something brushing its shell along a corner. The occasional distant scream in the night told me something was still out there, still killing. The moss fields weren't silent. Something cracked behind the far wall some distance away. I didn't move. My thoughts pulsed. Not words, exactly. Just pressure. A sense of angles. Spatial mapping, I guessed. The gland. My scylla had grown something. A wet, invisible organ trying to anchor me in space. That night, I saw without seeing. I watched without light. The thought of sleep never returned. When Brask roused for the 3rd watch, I barely noticed him until his fingers tapped the back of my hand. I handed him the puck. He sniffed, once, then tilted his head toward the window. I followed his gaze. There, outside the black void of obsidian, something flared. It was faint, just a line of jagged red firelight like cracked bone lit from within. A shape drifted past. Not a beast. Not a man. Something vertical. Tall and split with joints where no limbs should be. "You saw?" Brask whispered. I nodded again. "Don't tell Marcy. She needs the sleep." I gave no answer but nodded and rolled over in the corner. Though it was near pitch dark in that cold concrete box, I wasn't sure I got any sleep at all. The others didn't stir, or if they did, they kept it quiet. Brask had taken 3rd watch from Marcy, low to the floor and breathing like a nesting animal. Marcy curled herself against her pack with her scarf wrapped tight over her nose and eyes, completely still. I shifted onto my side and back again. My joints ached. My mind stayed wired. The concrete pressed heat out of me like it had been waiting to do so all night. I would have given anything to have my cot back in Horace Yard. It wasn't even a good cot. Lumpy. Frayed. The kind that screamed institutional. But it had felt like mine. Something solid. A place to tuck into after the strange rituals and decent meals. A place where I could pretend there was a pattern to this world. There wasn't one now. Not that I could see. The noises outside had changed. They weren't just distant anymore. Every few minutes a shriek cut the air from something massive, followed by the clatter of combat in the moss fields. It made my ribs clench. I kept seeing the shimmer of pale eyes at the edge of the window, floating just beyond the edge as if waiting for a movement. Our heat. Our scent. Our thoughts. I stayed still. The popping in my skull had stopped, but the memory of it remained, an echo under my thoughts. The gland was in place now, something they called ocular nerve. I did not know what that meant beyond what it had shown me, spatial memory, mapping, and orientation. Light was not required. I could still see the room with my eyes closed, the blue glow of the console, the black line of the window, the outline of Marcy's boots, and Brask's long hunch near the door. That part wasn't what scared me. It was the other part. The screen. The words. The voice? It hadn't been speech. Not really. But it had landed in my skull like a memory I didn't make. I hadn't read it so much as been impressed with it, like a seal against wet wax. A symphony of contradictions. Ancient and unending. A woman and a god. A wife and an orphan. Every line still pulsed through me, tangled and recursive. I am the one who is cast out. I am the solace of my labor pains. I am the name of the sound. It made no sense. It was like hearing scripture from a dead religion I somehow knew. Not even in words, just impressions. Shapes. I pressed my forehead against my arms and breathed in the smell of dust and cold nylon. The screen had done something to me. Not just the words. The presence behind them. The sense that something older than language had glanced at me. And the worst part? It hadn't even cared that I was there. I had to get a grip. Cogito, ergo sum. I thought the words slowly, like carving them into my own skull with a dull knife. I think. Therefore I am. That used to mean something to me. Back when I was in class. Back when philosophy wasn't about surviving until the next watch rotation. I clung to it now because it was the only thread I had. I had to reassert my shape. Rebuild the edge between myself and the rest of this place. I was the boy from Earth. I was Everett Monk. No. That name didn't hold the same weight anymore. It wasn't that I had forgotten it. It was that it no longer felt like the container for what I was, and I didn't want it to be a fit anymore. I still thought in English. I still reached for Earth metaphors. I still imagined fried rice when my stomach hurt and tap water when my throat dried out. But those were just memories. I was some new amalgam now. The boy from Earth and the echo of whatever system they'd installed in me. Whatever the Obelisk interface had grown. I didn't remember agreeing to it. I remembered sitting in the white pod. I remembered the nurse's voice, the game instructions, the hum of preloaded scenarios. But I never consented to this. This wasn't some new experience or ARG. This was real. And I was really here. And the old Everett? That was paused. Like a file I no longer had permission to access. If I ever wanted to go back to Earth, if going back was even possible, then I needed to finish becoming whatever this was. I needed to anchor myself. I was called Everett Monk, yes. But also something new. A will residing inside that name. Something coiled. But then the voice came again. Not a sound. Not even a word. Just pressure. But what will we become? I sat up. Not fast. Just enough to shift the weight in my ribs. The voice and its words hadn't been mine. It hadn't been Everett's either. It felt external. Like a voice carried by the gland. Or the screen. Or something unknowable. There was something blinking in my mind again, and when I acknowledged it and my progress bar had jumped 10% up from 2 to 12. I scanned the room. Brask was still watching the window across the room. Marcy hadn't moved. There was no source to the voice. I clenched my hands until my nails dug into the pads of my palms. The pain helped. A little. Just enough to clear the echo. The light outside changed. It was subtle at first. Just a shift in the temperature of the dark. Then, slowly, the pale white light of Parthosia's false morning began to leak through the slats and holes in the concrete superstructure above. Like the massive roof had been built from blinds and someone was drawing them open millimeter by millimeter. The sky was not blue. The sun didn't rise. Instead, the crust's thick layered atmosphere caught the reflective frost of the superstructure and turned it to ash-white streaks. Shadows moved vertically instead of across. It wasn't day, exactly. Just a lightening of the black. A wash of white clarity. From our single window, the one Brask had warned us about, I could make out more of the terrain outside. A jagged spill of broken plating and moss-soaked ridges. And beyond that, deeper still into the crust, outlines. Angular and tall. I stayed where I was. The light wasn't warm. It was stark. Sharp-edged. It turned the world into a rendering more than a memory. I watched it push across the floor, finally licking the edges of the console and revealing the full thickness of dust piled across its cracked frame. The screen still pulsed. The words? I could have sworn the words had changed. Please add more to the pile. The blue cursor blinked beneath the final line. No one had typed it, and then it went back to scrolling its LitRpg. My breath caught. I didn't call the others. I just stared. Something deep inside me, a feeling, something older than fear, it told me not to inform them yet. Another day in Parthosia. Brask was already moving when I sat up. He made no sound, just padded over to the window on the balls of his feet and stared out into the wash of pale morning light. The false dawn peeled over his hunched form in gray, angular strips. From the way his ears twitched, he'd been up for some time. He looked almost cheerful. Marcy stirred in her scarf nest, groaning as she blinked against the light. "You're far too awake," she mumbled at Brask. He shrugged, turning from the window with a wide grin. I noticed he avoided brushing against any of the odd furniture, those cold, molded steel benches and counters like petrified office equipment half-grown, half-welded to the floor. "We survived the dark with no night running, yes? That is reason to be joyful," he said. Marcy rolled her eyes. "He's like this every time something goes off plan." I laughed. Not loud, not long. Just a short, honest chuckle. It helped. The noise sounded normal. The kind of noise I hadn't realized I missed until it came out of my own mouth. The weight in my chest loosened. Brask nodded sharply. Let us get on the hunt, yes? Before it gets crowded. We geared up. Quietly. Deliberately. I shouldered my pack and followed Marcy back to the sealed door. The pale screen behind us kept flickering like it had always been there, reciting its mad sermon to the dust. I didn't glance at it again. Marcy knelt by the control panel. She closed her eyes, exhaled slowly through her nose, and unwrapped the layers of fabric around her left forearm. What lay beneath wasn't skin. Sutures crisscrossed the tissue like stitching on a leather sleeve. Beneath that, the skin trembled. Something moved. And then, impossibly, something bloomed from her flesh. A coiled root system, like metallic veins or fine wire mesh, extruded from her wrist and ran in glistening lines toward the lock panel. The moment the lines reached the device, it responded. With a chirp, then a grind. The door stuttered and hissed open by half a meter. I hadn't had the time to savor the horror of this last night, but the sight was now forever burned into my vision. Marcy opened her eyes again. They were bloodshot. Not from tears or sleep deprivation, but from whatever effort that cost. The red spiderweb spread through the whites of her eyes like a burst vessel. Brask offered her a shoulder. She brushed it off. I'm fine. Let's go. Outside, the madness of Parthosia greeted us. Light slashed through the remains of the superstructure in long wide angles. The moss fields lay ahead, shifting in slow windless ripples. Beyond them, the reach of the broken crust showed its scale. Towers half submerged. Bridges that arced into nothing. And further still, what looked like a fossilized freight crawler, the size of a city block, frozen mid-collapse. We moved in a staggered line. I walked in the middle, careful not to outpace the others, but leading when I could. The strange memory overlay, the ocular nerve gland, it still hummed gently in my skull. A bright lattice of remembered space traced our return path. It hurt to keep active. My eyes ached. The bones around my sockets pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. But I found I could blink it off and on. Not like flipping a switch, more like sliding a pane of glass into and out of focus. Something behind my pupils adjusted each time, a faint pressure shift that made my sinuses itch. I wondered if this was what Kaoru felt. If the body always betrayed you a little in exchange for utility. His crown had changed his voice, his posture, his skin. Mine was changing the wiring for now. All knowledge has consequences. That phrase had repeated somewhere. I couldn't place when or who had said it. The saying fluttered at the edge of understanding. Maybe it was something Kaoru whispered back in Horus Yard. Maybe it was from the screen. Or maybe it was one of those internal phrases that crawl up from your subconscious when you're too tired to know better. We stalked forward in silence. The light around us thick pale shafts from above, fractured by the decaying architecture into holy beams that painted the moss with razor-edged brightness. It didn't warm us directly, the rays stung and burned. But it made the landscape feel alive. We hunted. Or rather, we scouted. Brask pointed out likely game paths and suggested we split if needed. Marcy vetoed it immediately. Not until we find fresh prints, she said. We passed through a broken gorge lined with pink fungal tendrils. The air smelled bitter. Metallic. And then the moss gave way to something worse. It wasn't sand. Not exactly. But it shifted like it. A slick granular field of black grains with threads of rust-colored glass. It was as wide as a football field, bordered by collapsed walls and scorched remnants of vent pylons. Marcy stepped forward to test it, then yanked her boot back as the top crust sank with a burp of heat. Some kind of decay field, who knows how many layers it penetrated, she muttered. We go around, Brask agreed. We circled north, hugging the walls, crossing tight corridors of dead plant growth and shattered vent valves. I kept the overlay active until I couldn't stand the pressure. Then I blinked it away and used my eyes instead. Brask was the one to catch the next sign. He froze, nostrils twitching, then knelt by a line in the moss. A smear. A dragging mark of dark black blood in the odd light. Something had pulled a kill through here. He touched it with 2 fingers. Sniffed. Fresh. 1 hour maybe. Marcy exhaled slowly. I felt my throat tighten. I looked around. We weren't alone. I switched my vision. The memory sight. The ache behind my eyes flared instantly, but I held it. The trail changed. Where blood had once pooled, I now saw it fall again, the droplets rising, then vanishing. Time rewound by a few seconds, letting me see what the moss had already begun to forget. The smear became a splatter. The trail reformed. I couldn't see the creature. Just the aftermath. Brask caught my change. He looked at Marcy and made a small pleading motion with his hand, like a dog asking to run. "Yes, go," she hissed. "Come on, Monk. Follow me." Brask took off into the field. The overgrown moss rippled with his movement, like the skin of some great beast. Marcy sprinted in the opposite direction, down the blood-lined stalk path. I stayed on her heels, ignoring the pain from the overlay still active behind my eyes. And then I saw it. And it loomed over the half-eaten corpse of something that looked like a gremlin. Gore soaked its chest. Blood steamed in the cold. The stilt legs flexed, tearing the kill wider, long loops of intestine dragging free as it repositioned. Marcy motioned for me to still. We were close enough now to see the smear of its tongue cable leave faint black lines on the ground. The hunt had found its beast. And the beast had not yet found us. Marcy's signal was a twitch of her fingers, and then she moved. Her body shifted from stillness into action without pause, one fluid sequence of intention carried by years of practice. She lunged with her spear tight in both hands, feet low, carving the moss with each planted step. I didn't think there was no time, so I followed. The creature had only begun to lift its head when Marcy rammed the spear into its side. The tip punched through the hide and muscle, finding a seam between the ribs with the sound of a rubber mallet striking wet cloth. The thing shrieked, a sharp, mechanical warble that shot down my spine and hollowed the space behind my eyes. It didn't fall. Worse, it didn't stagger. I gritted my teeth and surged forward, copying Marcy's attack as best I could. My arms were weaker. The angle was wrong. But I drove the spear in just behind hers. The shaft vibrated with resistance, like shoving metal into clay. The creature screamed again. The parasitic vines on its back whipped wildly, slinging droplets of black-green blood into the air. It reared back, and its mouth snapped open, cable tongue lashing wide. Marcy dropped left. I dove right. It caught me anyway. The edge of the cable whipped across my back, a hot flash of pain slicing from shoulder to hip. I hit the moss hard, breath leaving my lungs in a bark. I rolled, not thinking, just moving, one thought spiraling through my mind: if I stayed down, I died. My coiled pistol was in my hand before I could stop myself. I knelt, raised it, and lined up the creature's thrashing form. Its limbs jerked with unspent power, and its skull was pivoting back toward Marcy. "No, Everett. Don't do that, not yet." Her voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. The creature turned. It launched toward her in a single, snapping lurch of its body, the legs flexing and releasing in perfect harmony. I almost disobeyed. My finger hovered over the trigger. Then Brask arrived. He came from the moss like a fired bolt, spear angled down, body twisted into a killing arc. He dropped with full weight behind the weapon, landing square on the creature's back. The spear drove deep, straight through the writhing spines, and the whole frame of the beast shuddered. It collapsed forward, its legs splaying out from under it as its torso slammed into the remains of its meal. Wet meat and bone crunched beneath it. Brask snarled something in his native tongue and drove the spear deeper with both hands. The creature twitched once, its limbs seizing, then falling still. The tongue lashed one final time, then flopped limp. Silence fell. None of us moved. Not right away. I held my breath and scanned the moss fields. Listened. Nothing answered. No cries. No echoing thumps. Just wind. Just the far-off creak of steel. Brask finally pulled his spear free and let out a triumphant huff. "That," he said, panting with a grin, "is why we bring sharp sticks." Marcy exhaled sharply, then turned on me with a look somewhere between fury and fear. "You were going to shoot it?" I nodded, still catching my breath. "Yeah. I was." "Don't. Not unless Brask or I say. We don't know what kind of response that noise would pull out here. You want another one of those things? A pack?" My mouth went dry. "No. I get it. I just..." "You got hit. Let me look." I turned without arguing. The cut on my back stung like a fresh burn, and the fabric of my jacket stuck to it. She peeled it back and hissed through her teeth. "Not deep. Lucky. That cable must have just glanced off you. Hold still." She smeared a paste from her satchel across the wound. It was cold, and it smelled like mint and copper. Brask crouched by the creature's corpse, pulling the other two spears free. One was mine. He handed it back, blood slick and still warm. "This one is not for eating," he said, nodding toward the dead beast. "But the one it killed, maybe. We check." Marcy sighed. "Only if we have to. I'd rather not bring back gremlin meat unless it's fresh." Brask prodded the half-eaten corpse and made a face that reminded me too much of a dog. "It was a fresh kill, yes? We can salvage some, no?" I wiped my hands on the moss and stood straight, wincing as the cut pulled. My pulse was still racing, my thoughts skipping too fast to hold. We had won. Barely. But the kill hadn't felt clean. It hadn't felt like a triumph. The way the creature bled. The way it thrashed without slowing down. The way the vines shivered as if mourning. None of it felt normal. Marcy glanced toward the sun shafts above. We need to prep and haul this soon. Camp's not close. If we get nothing today because we lose this, that fight will have been for nothing. Brask wiped his blade clean and nodded. We go on. Deeper. I checked my pistol. Still charged. Still hot. I left it holstered. We began the quick work antsy once again, the moss fields swaying around us. And somewhere, far behind the sounds of wind and steel, something else moved too. Brask was already peeling the creature open by the time I snapped out of my daze. Marcy muttered something under her breath, pulled her gloves on, and started unpacking from the long kit roll she kept secured to her belt. Knives, seal bags. Brask tossed me a smaller blade, curved and stubby, almost like a flensing hook. He gestured to the kill's undercarriage. There. You help. Fast now. Not perfect. Fast. I knelt by the carcass and immediately gagged. The smell had bloomed open now that the belly had split. Wrought metal and wire mold. Brask had cut the thing from sternum to tail, revealing the crushed remains of a gutter sphinx, the true kill, partially devoured by her larger target. The sphinx's body had been ripped in half, its skin already flayed where the predator's tongue had fed. The long pipe-like tongue still protruded from its half-crushed skull, twitching faintly, as if its nerves hadn't yet realized death had settled in. Dozens of small, glassy eyes dotted the thing's face and neck, many punctured or melted. The mouth bristled with serrated, two-even teeth. Its quadruped frame had been snapped at the spine, the back legs twisted and dragging. What was left of the torso sloshed with fluids thick as jelly, its internal sacs crushed and sagging. The stench made my tongue curl back in my mouth. It was like boiled iron and liquefied batteries. Brask didn't slow. Sense strong, Brask grunted. It calls things. Worse things. Marcy gripped a bundle of tendons and sliced through with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 100 times. She didn't flinch when one of the sacks burst against her boots. Get in here. Watch what we pull. I obeyed. My hands trembled, but I steadied them. The knife felt clumsy in my grip. I found the first organ she pointed to, something like a stiff lobe folded in on itself 3 times, and braced before cutting. It parted like paper soaked in gel. The heat inside the cavity pushed against my face like steam off a subway vent. That's a core bladder. Rupture it, and the gases will leave a trail we can't cover. Bag it, Everett. Gently. The pace picked up. Brask and Marcy moved in a rhythm that looked closer to dance than labor. One cutting, one packaging. They passed pieces of the corpse between them, never speaking more than a word or two. I did my best to keep up, crawling along the moss and handing off tissue where I could. My job was half apprentice, half porter. I watched Brask work. The sewer gnol's hands moved with uncanny precision, pulling out filaments and membranes like he was unraveling a woven mat. His claws flexed at odd angles to hold slippery tubes while he cut with his knife. This one. Bad gland, he said, pointing to a bulb buried between 2 spinal plates. Bitter. Must be removed whole. You nick, you ruin whole shoulder meat. I nodded and tried not to breathe through my nose. The thing was disgusting. Each time we pulled out an organ, the hole got deeper, the smell worse. The fluid soaked through my sleeves. Something was crusting on my knuckles. I didn't ask. Brask clicked his teeth and handed me a scalpel. Take cyst, like this pinch above. Cut. Not deep. I reached for it and paused. My vision blurred for a second. Overlay? No, just exhaustion. Or maybe the crown was reacting again. I pushed the thought aside and focused. The cyst was lodged along the creature's lower ribs, a marbled sac wrapped in tough netting. I pinched and cut, just like he said. It popped loose into my palm with a soft, unpleasant snap. Good, Brask said. Now throw. Far. It will burst. I did. The cyst hit the moss a good 10 meters off and cracked open like an overripe gourd. The stench was immediate. Brask hissed through his teeth. Fast now. Everything smells. Marcy passed me a hot seal bag, and we started loading in the salvageable cuts. Strips of thigh muscle, half a flank, a string of back tendons that Brask said could be chewed like gum for weeks. We left the stomach. Too many parasites. We left the skull. The brain case was armored and would take too long to crack. The longer we worked, the more the air felt tight. Like something pressing against us. The moss around us shifted and I kept cutting. We skinned the underside quickly, tossing the hide into a separate fold bag. It wasn't edible, but Brask said the black fur could be used as scent lure. I didn't ask what for. I was sweating under my robes, but I didn't stop. At one point, Marcy grabbed my wrist. "Stop. That's not meat. That's cooling tendons. Cut that, and you ruin half the yield that's still left." I backed off immediately. Brask pulled the bundle free himself. It shimmered in the light, pale green and veined like a leaf. "Never seen this color before, yes? Keep." The last part was the worst. We had to flush the rib cavity with a mixture Brask kept in a capped vial. It was caustic. The smoke made my eyes sting. But it neutralized the chemical in the creature's blood that would cause a quick rot. At least, that's what they told me. I could still feel the scent-like pressure in my sinuses. We sealed the final bags, clipped them to our packs, and stepped back. The creature's husk was a sunken outline in the moss, steam curling from the cavity. Black liquid pooled beneath its legs, and the vines on its back had finally stopped moving. "We walk now," Brask said. "Fast. No talk." Marcy handed me my spear. Her hands were stained red. Mine were worse. Chapter 10, The Wilderness Part 4. We didn't break into a sprint right away. That would have wasted the energy we didn't have and sent everything that might have been watching into a full chase. But as we moved fast, weaving through the moss stalks with sharp turns and purposeful strides, my mind suddenly screeched. It wasn't pain exactly, not really, just a cold, electric shock that raced across my spine and poured sweat down my back. My danger sense was alive again, warning before thought could form. Each step sank half an inch into the spongy carpet, leaving prints. Too many prints. I kept the overlay active. The ocular nerve gland hummed behind my eyes, and the trail of our approach. The overlay outlined the footprints, the drag lines, the butcher side. It burned with residual heat and memory vision. What scared me was how fast that heat was attracting others. Not just one set of tracks. Many. The moss rippled in strange, deliberate lines. They weren't random. They weren't small. They converged, arrowed in. I said, trying to keep my voice low. "We have incoming." Brask didn't need to check. He glanced back once, nostrils twitching. Marcy turned halfway to look at me. They both said it at the same time. "Run." And we ran. The moss fields blurred past. The tall stalks reached to our shoulders in places, swaying and slapping violently as we pushed through them. The god ray loomed like an oven vent, and the heat curled along our backs. The smell of blood clung to us. The butchered corpse had broadcast a scent line miles long, and now that line was on our heels. Behind us, the clicking began. Insectal at first. Then something heavier. A skitter, a bounding rhythm of hunters. I didn't look back. Not yet. We bounded through the last of the tall stalks and into the shorter moss near the shaded superstructure edge. The stalks no longer slowed us, and we picked up speed. Brask turned his head, eyes wide, and grinned through heavy breath. "Looks like they found the kill site," he called. "There won't be enough. Some will follow." "Yes?" We pushed harder. The climb back to our camp wasn't that far. A few levels up, through a long path climbing walls where ropes had been fixed earlier. We'd used them once already, yesterday. It had felt stable then. It didn't feel stable so now. By the time we reached the rope, the moss behind us was shaking. Something big was in pursuit. Marcy went first. She didn't even hesitate. Her boots hit the wall and she went up fast, arms and legs moving in practiced rhythm. I reached the rope next and jumped to grab it, my hands already slick with sweat and blood. I climbed. 5 feet up, I felt the air behind me shift. An electric tingling. I looked back. 2 bounding shapes tore out from the last of the moss fields. Long-limbed, low to the ground, striders. Striders like the one we killed. These were faster, leaner. Their exoskeletons glistened with condensation from the god ray heat. Their jointed legs kicked up sheets of moss, and their tongues whipped from their open maws like searching cables. Brask laughed. Not a chuckle. Not a bark. A full, open-throated, manic laugh. Guttural and bright. I turned as best I could while climbing and saw him. He'd stripped his robe top, letting it fall from his shoulders. His frame, always broad, looked monstrous now. His torso swelled visibly with each breath. Then, something worse. His arms split. At first, I thought it was just blood. That maybe he'd been hit and was tearing. But no. His muscles peeled outward, and within seconds, where 2 arms had been, there were 4. Not separate limbs, not from the shoulder. The arms themselves bifurcated at the elbow, doubling outward like braided muscle cords, wrapped in tension and webbing. The cords pulsed. Veins bulged. Blood rushed visibly through translucent layers, pumping up each new limb while leaking blood and fluids. Each new forearm held a spear. His jaw cracked and dropped open. Not a scream, but an expansion. His tongue lolled out, thick and wide, glistening with saliva. His back twitched. I heard the ribs shift. He stepped forward. The striders skidded to a halt. They didn't attack immediately. They clicked at each other. One spread wide to the left. The other circled. Hunting formation. I paused. My hand went to my holster. The third one was coming. It hadn't yet broken from the moss, but from my higher vantage, I saw the ripple. A streak through the shorter growth, moving like a torpedo under green waves. The third would arrive in seconds. Brask spun his spears. All four. It looked absurd. Unreal. Like something out of an old movie or a fever dream. Like General Grievous, if Grievous was a nightmare bulk sewer beast with wet laughter spilling out of his cracked jaw. I drew my pistol. Marcy's voice exploded from above. "Oh, damned saints, Everett. No. We just talked about this. Get up here." "Not yet." "But Brask." "Get up here." I cursed under my breath and holstered the pistol. I climbed. My feet slipped twice, adrenaline breaking the flow of motion, but I made it to the ledge. Marcy grabbed my wrist and yanked me up. We dropped to our bellies and peered over the edge. Brask was below, ringed by predators. The two striders flanked him, twitching with coordinated hunger. The third broke from the moss and charged straight in. It didn't hesitate. Brask twisted, all four spears lashing out. One caught the beast in the shoulder. Another sank into its mouth. But the other two striders moved. One snapped at his flank. The other darted beneath and slashed at his leg. Brask stumbled. Marcy hissed and reached for the rope. "Stay. Here." She slid down the line before I could argue. Below, Brask was holding ground, but only barely. He held now. Not a laugh. Not a battle cry. Just raw sound. The spears danced, but they were no longer in sync. He was bleeding. One leg had gone weak, movement dragging. The striders circled faster. Marcy hit the ground in a roll, spear already in hand. She charged. I watched, breath tight. Brask turned at the sound of her landing and his eyes flared. He didn't look grateful. He looked lost. Like he was sliding somewhere else entirely. His tongue writhed. The spears dipped, then surged again. He was faster now. Rage-fed. But it was wild. Uncontrolled. Marcy slammed into the nearest strider and carved a line across its side. Black blood sprayed the moss. Brask bellowed. The other two turned. I could see it unfolding. We'd get one. Maybe two. But more would come. I was the only one left above the rope. I could barely breathe. Not from fear. Not anymore. From how fast it was all moving. From how sharp it had turned. Marcy had slammed her spear into the strider's flank and it collapsed in a screech that sounded like hydraulics ripping themselves apart. A wet, metallic howl echoed between the walls of the crust. It spasmed once, then went still. The other two stepped back. They didn't run. They began to shiver. At first I thought it was fear. But then the sound hit. Not a cry, not a growl, but a kind of chittering chorus that vibrated against my feelings. It wasn't just sound. It was signal. Something low and wrong, bouncing between the broken walls and empty halls of Parthosia. The maze of superstructure carried it like a horn blast. And it was calling. I flinched. Brask flinched. Marcy moved. She didn't run. She jumped. Straight onto Brask's back. Her limbs clamped around his seething, sinew-ripped frame and her head fell forward, eyes closed. Her hands pressed against the back of his neck and a strange pulse snapped through the air. Her vion glowed against the exposed skin of his mutated spine. "Now, Everett," she shouted. "Now." My hand was already on the gun. The weight of it felt like memory, like training surfacing from beneath adrenaline. Kneeling. Breathing. Brask's training. Aim. Squeeze. The first shot cracked out. It missed. Completely. The coil burst spat fire and sound through the broken zone, echoing like cathedral bells thundering in a hollow city. The striders flinched. Everything froze. Then I fired again. 3-round burst. Center mass. One of the striders jolted as the first slug tore through its open mouth and blew out the back of its neck. The second slug struck lower, shoulder or spine. The third I never saw end, because it was already collapsing. The final one turned to run. I dumped fire into it. My arm bucked with recoil, and my vision tunneled on that silhouette. The shots chewed through its legs, its hips, its side. It toppled. Silence. Then, wet breathing. Brask. Marcy was still on him. Her hands glowed faintly now, the viand sparking and arcing thin wires of light into Brask's spine. He was convulsing, but not violently. Just twitching. Like biosystems were going offline, one by one. His arms collapsed inwards, retracting into a more human frame. Muscle unknotted. Flesh sealed over. The madness drained from his face, slowly. I watched. It was intimate in a way that made me look away. Not erotic. Not really. But something old. Something shared. The binding of minds and systems. And then the light in the sky changed. A sound like rusted rails being torn apart screamed above us. A shadow passed over the moss. The light went strobing. From above, from a hidden hide in the superstructure, something massive descended. I didn't see all of it. Just legs. 8 of them. Angular. Machine rust-etched. They clattered along girders with perfect balance, rotating downward in calculated motion. Between them, a single red eye spun in a circular socket, tracking. The machine dropped toward us with a hiss and whine like ancient hydraulics given purpose again. It was hunting. Me. Because I had fired. Because I had rung the bell. I nearly fell to my knees. The weight of it pressed down like atmosphere. Everett. Get down here now. Marcy's voice cut through the noise, sharp with urgency. Not fear. Just command. I looked down. She and Brask were limping toward a hole, a black wound in the crust. A way down. A way out. I grabbed the rope. Blood slicked my hands. The kill. The climb. It made every foot of descent a gamble. The rope burned through my palms, heat and friction blistering my skin. I gritted my teeth and let gravity take most of the work. I hit the bottom too fast. Rolled. Marcy caught me, one arm already under Brask. Move, she said. We moved. The 3 of us ran. Staggered. Down into the hole. Into a darker layer of Parthosia. Above us, the machine screamed and searched and the sounds of Parthosia screeched with combat. I did not know what had just happened. Only that the air grew colder, and my danger sense never quieted. We moved fast, but we didn't run. Not anymore. The shock had passed. The silence had followed. We limped, me on one side of Brask, Marcy on the other. He was heavier now. Grounded again. But the effort of changing back had left him drained and slow. The corridor we dropped into was barely a corridor. More like a failed joint between layers of construction. A crawlspace that had once been some sort of channel, maybe, back when this place had builders. Now it was just dark. Lichen had colonized the corners. Old support beams had flaked apart. It smelled like rust and old oil and something fungal I couldn't name. The light above flickered through a warped grate, casting a grid across the floor that warped as we moved through it. Every few feet, it would disappear entirely as the machine above crossed its path. The sound of it hadn't stopped, not entirely. Every few seconds it would screech on a rail or drag a footplate across a beam and remind us how close it still was. Marcy crouched low, motioned me to keep Brask's weight steady. We were half walking, half dragging him through the crawlspace. The deeper we got, the more I felt that cold edge creep back into my spine. I finally broke. Guys, you're going to have to give me something here. What the fuck just happened? Brask snorted. It wasn't a laugh, but the ghost of one. His mouth was still closing up, pieces of skin knitting slowly over wet muscle. Hunting, he managed. It sounded like gravel. No, I snapped, pulling him forward another step. Come on. I'm not going any further until you tell me what the fuck that was. The spears, the tongue, the thing that came down from above. Marcy paused. We were in a flat space now. Almost a platform. Wide enough that we could all stand. She turned, her face unreadable in the broken light. Everett, she said carefully. That was something from the build layer. We're close. Sometimes they come down when something's called them. For rare resources. For disruptions. We got unlucky. She scanned the grid above us and lowered her voice. I get it. I know you're confused. That's normal. It always is. We'll explain everything. I promise. But not here. Not yet. I think this is a GOG level. GOGs? I asked, already halfway knowing the answer. General Operations Gnomes. Subterranean tunnel nomads. Indigenous inhabitants of Parthosia and not friendly ones. We don't want to run into those. Brask groaned, leaned against a corroded bulkhead. Rest, he said. Marcy looked around and pointed to a space tucked under a slanted pipe array. It looked stable enough. Not clean. Not safe. But quiet. We helped Brask limp over. I took first watch while Marcy checked his spine and whatever inner workings she'd accessed earlier. They spoke in low tones I didn't catch. I sat with my back against the wall, eyes flicking from the flickering grate above to the dark corridors ahead. The cold in my back hadn't gone away. Neither had the hum in my skull. The danger sense wasn't just a spike anymore. It was just a baseline. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't shaking, but I hadn't relaxed either. That sense of orientation, the spatial lattice from the gland, it remained active even with my eyes off. I could feel the map of this crawlspace the way you feel the shape of your mouth with your tongue. Not natural. But not foreign either. Like I'd grown into it without knowing. I sat with my back against the wall, eyes flicking from the flickering grate above to the dark corridors ahead. The cold in my back hadn't gone away. Neither had the hum in my skull. The danger sense wasn't just a spike anymore. It was just a baseline. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't shaking, but I hadn't relaxed either. That sense of orientation, the spatial lattice from the gland, it remained active even with my eyes closed. I could feel the map of this crawlspace the way you feel the shape of your mouth with your tongue. Not natural. But not foreign either. Like I'd grown into it without knowing. Brask was asleep now. Or at least quiet. Marcy had bandaged his leg and wiped the worst of the gore off his shoulders. His breathing was shallow but steady. He looked almost gnollish again. Marcy sat across from me, arms on her knees, hands loose. She hadn't said anything for a while. I broke the silence. So, are you ready to explain it yet? She didn't meet my eyes at first. She watched Brask, then the dancing shadows behind him. Her fingers flexed once, absently. Everett, you need to understand, she said finally. Nothing we're doing down here is normal or safe, not even by Parthosia standards. What you saw up there. That wasn't even the highest layer. Not even close. I know that, I said. But I still need to understand. The spears. The change. The machine. All of it. You keep giving me half-truths like they're going to keep me alive. They won't. Marcy studied me. Then nodded once. All right, she said. You want to know what happened? You want to know what Brask is? Fine. But you better listen. I don't want to repeat this shit. I nodded. Brask is a crown bearer. Same as me. Same as you now. That thing in your head that started humming or however you feel it? That wasn't just a sense of danger that you warned us with. That's crown interface. You're more tuned to it now, even if you don't understand how. I shifted, the cold of the metal at my back grounding me. Crown bearer, yeah, I know that. And don't bring up Ka-ur-u like he makes this clearer. That cryptic bastard let me walk out with half a library and a timer in my skull. I'm done pretending this is new. I want the real version. Not the back of the book cover pitch. Yes. You chose compass. Which means you're meant to embody the knowledge, something abstract like to walk, to trace, to guide through us the dark. Brask shows sinew. I glanced at the heap of exhausted muscle across the crawl space. And what does sinew do exactly? Marcy blew air through her nose. Almost a laugh. What you saw. That wasn't some mutant trick or implant. That was his crown expression. Sinew paths let you explode the body into combat potential. Over muscle. Split skeletal structure. Reflex braids. Every part of it costs, though. That kind of transformation burns through blood, oxygen, salt, even cognition. If you don't rein him in, he loses his mind to it. Becomes like the Striders. And that was happening up there. Yes. And if I hadn't gotten him back down, he might not have come back at all. The silence settled again. I let it. A few seconds passed before I spoke. And the machine? The one that came down the structure? What the hell was that? Marcy swallowed. Her jaw tightened. That was a builder sentinel. The name meant nothing. My face must have shown it. They're not alive in any way we understand. They're remnants. Pieces of the construction force that built Parthosia. And I mean built it. Not the cities. The layers themselves. The vaults. The gates. The whole architecture. No one knows how many still function. But when they do, they respond to triggers. Changes in heat, energy signatures, disruptions. You firing your gun probably rang every acoustic sensor for half a mile. You didn't seem to care about that when we were running. I just fully jab at Marcy. She met my eyes sharply. Because the alternative was letting Brask die. And that wasn't an option. I nodded. I understood that part. So why am I only hearing this now? Why not before we came down here? Marcy tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. Because if we told you everything, you'd never have left the yard. You would have fought and resisted, and we needed you to come. We need help, Everett. And compass is the type the yard and church use to see clearly down here. Perception, tracking, sense-making. Without someone aligned to a perception crown, we're blind in the places that matter. That's why it had to be you. Tell me more about that machine, I said, voice flat, the weight of exhaustion finally snapping my patience. And why the church has us out here. I'm done taking the half-truths. Start talking. Marcy rubbed a hand through her hair, eyes flicking once to Brask, then back to me. She sighed. You want more? Fine. That thing wasn't just some old construct. It was from the build layer. That's a height of the world where the active infrastructure still changes itself. We're talking about strata that grow, collapse, and grow again. The superstructure eats and rebuilds itself constantly. There are layers within layers down here, Everett. The one we were just on? Might be gone in a week. Or it might have been built centuries ago. No one knows. Not really. I stared at her. She continued. It's all part of the never-stopping construction loop. Parthosia isn't just an ancient ruin. It's alive in a way. Always repairing, always failing, always remaking itself. And every once in a while, something old wakes up to fix the mess. She pointed toward the ceiling, where rust flakes drifted from faint seismic tremors. When those things come down, they're not looking for us. They're looking to restore order to a program that's rotting. We just happen to be the mess. I looked at my hands. The blood had dried. The rope burns were still raw. I flexed them slowly. And this place, I said. This whole pit. It isn't just some wasteland, is it? No. It's not anything so clear. Parthosia is an abstract hell. It mimics logic just long enough to betray you. The systems rot and grow at the same time. Half of it eats itself, the other half builds without end. There are no true rules, Everett. What makes sense one level up won't save you down another. The creatures are not alive. They are not dead either. They act out dreams and orders they were never meant to finish. And if you get caught by one, you either wake up irrevocably changed, or not at all. Brask stirred. He didn't wake, but his breathing hitched. We should move again soon, Marcy said. The longer we stay still, the more the place notices. I stood slowly. You said this is a GOG level. What does that mean for us right now? It means keep your voice down and don't touch anything. GOGs don't sleep like we do. They have senses, she hesitated. And they tunnel. Which means any stable floor might not stay stable. I helped her lift Brask again. He groaned but managed to stand. We set off down the corridor, deeper into the dark cramped space, every step echoing with some part of what she just told me. I didn't understand everything yet. Not even close. But I was starting to see the shape of it. A world built by fighting forces. Maybe gods. Maybe worse. It was never clear. Only that it devoured clarity and spat out confusion. Whatever logic Terra once had, it's fractured now, scattered through a million inconsistent layers that rewrite themselves in real time. It wasn't meant to be understood. Only endured. I took the lead as we moved again, trying to trace our path backward. My memory sight gave me a dim outline of where we had run, where we had fallen, where we had bled. Brask kept his head down, sniffing at the dust and mold like he was searching for a trail only he could read. Marcy followed in the middle, occasionally glancing behind us, her grip tight on the haft of her spear. We crossed girders and cracked flooring, dipped under collapsed ceiling panels and moved through a long never-ending crawl space. Our pace wasn't fast, but it was steady. Every few turns which were rare in the wide open space I stopped to listen, letting the cold hum of danger settle before I pressed onward. I didn't trust silence anymore. When we finally found a hollowed-out corner behind what looked like a warped server bank, we paused. The space was just wide enough for us to crouch without brushing the roof. I checked for growths, for holes, for signs of GOG tunneling even though I had no idea what that looked like, then nodded. Safe enough. Brask slumped into the corner and began to mutter in low guttural dialect, words I didn't catch but understood as habit, a manner of meditation, his way of slowing his heart and grounding his thoughts. Marcy sat on a fractured casing, the sharp edge digging into her thigh, but she didn't flinch. I remained standing. Watching. Trying to mark this place in my memory, burn it into the mental map. We would have to move again soon, and when we did, I needed to know where we were going. I can retrace our route, I said quietly. At least most of it. Enough to find another way up, if we have to. Marcy gave a tired nod, not quite trusting words yet. Brask exhaled through his nose, more at ease than before. We rested. But only in the body. The mind stayed braced. Chapter 11, Interlude, Old Canoma. Somniel, the Hypnarch, Stagnant king of Old Kenoma, warden of the sleepers, was awake again. It was a burden he did not relish. To be conscious was to feel the weight of the world and all its errant thoughts pressing down on his mind like a flood of warm oil. It slipped across his perception, clouding what little clarity he had been allowed to retain from his last descent into stillness. He had slept for cycles he could not count, curled in the marble crypt that ran beneath the 37th prism, his dreams empty like ships across the black waters of void. But the dream had changed. It was not a voice that woke him, nor the touch of his court. It was something deeper. A dissonance. A fracturing alarm in the stillness. Something had moved in the deep machine and the breathless circuit of the world had stuttered. He again opened his many eyes. He rose slowly, like an anchor being hauled from the depths. Bones thick with crystal creaked under layered robes that had once been glorious, weaved by the greatest artisans from the tongues of prophets. His throne room was not a place for the living. It was tiled in cooling plates and scentless metal, dotted with still forms beneath glass coffins. His advisors, his people. Those chosen to join him and the ennui. The sacred stillness. The pact that had given space to his lady to forget. Namaris. Lady Namaris, quiet Namaris, Namaris the pale. Namaris, the last whisper, Namaris of the hushed gate. She had been his once. In that old, painful sense that now embarrassed him. They had known one another before divinity had rewritten her name, and then before her silence had become holy. After she realized the truth of our existence and she had sought to forget the world and all its pains, and he, faithful to the last, had built her a kingdom in which forgetting might be possible. And it had worked. The ennui had been kept. A eon-long drift of quiet, enforced by his will and his allies. A pact that froze the petty hopes and dreams of mortals and allowed the goddess to dissolve. But now her stillness had broken. The triumvirate. False gods. Pretender heirs. Their actions in Parthosia had echoed too loudly as they always did. The hum of the system woke circuits that had long since been coated in ash. The deep bloodlines of Keel moved. And when the Keel moved, so too must Kenoma. He stood alone in the dark hall of his throne room, and then he did what few kings would dare. He wept. Not out of sorrow. Not out of rage. But out of the pure, exhausted ache of knowing that his lady's peace had ended again. It would be war. His voice was dry as paper when it finally left his throat. I truly hope it is soon, my love, let your work end soon, he croaked. I miss you more each time I awake. The systems long since responded to his unconscious command. Stasis tubes hissed. Ducts howled with vacuum release. Lights blinked green across rusted control arrays as 1,000 synthetic hearts began to beat again. The citizens of Old Kenoma stirred in their status stations, each soul roused to the labor of war without dreams, without choice. Soldiers pulled from cryo-memory. Engineers unfrozen beside forgotten engines. Silence choirs unfurled from their burial in the choir crypt to begin intoning the LitRpgs once more. Across the empty city of mirrors and half-ruined arcologies, the war machine stirred. The heavy gates of the first rampart cracked and whined open, revealing the black battalions of the stagnant host. They bore no banners. They needed none. They were the children of ennui. They did not fight for conquest or vengeance or pride. They fought to silence the world. To let her forget again. And Somniel, warden of the sleepers, would see it done. The lady, his lady would rest. Or all of Terra would burn until she could. Kenoma marched. The ennui would be enforced. And the names of the triumvirate would be unspoken forevermore. Chalybia, the Iron Moon, groaned in her orbit as satellite pulses signaled the reawakening of Old Kenoma. There was no dreaming on Chalybia. No ennui. The Iron Moon did not rest, did not sleep. Her mobile cities burned with constant firelight, pyramids of steel and slag stacked like teeth beneath the void. Every drop of molten iron, every whisper of engineered oxygen, every unit of flesh and machine bled loyalty to the Archon twins, war and progress. The creed was carved into every reinforced surface, labor, contest, conquest. There was no other purpose. Beneath the massive stepped kilns of Tazal-Rotha, the voice smiths tuned the alarms of the forge basilica to long-buried frequency bands. War priests daubed their foreheads with smelted blood and began the bone counting. Signal relics lit in the black stone temples. Battle engineers whispered to their engines and kissed the targeting uplinks in the braziers of their gods. The oldest mechs flexed their ancient arms in oil-choked pits. The cries of the gladiators echoed through temple factories layered in oxidized prayer script. It was not chaos. It was preparation towards and for the inevitable, long rehearsed. The general priests of the twin blood ducts gathered in the Colosseum engine, a 1,000-tiered amphitheater suspended between fusion anchors. Their skin was painted in iron ash, their words intoned through ceremonial modulation helms. High among them, the living conduit of the twins' equal parts oracle and war machine stood suspended in a cruciform of cable and light, reading the data warlocks and logarithmic shamans' outputs, seething with ancient will. Somniel had moved. Blood began to flow on command. Not as mere sacrifice to progress, but as ignition for real war. As inheritance dictated. Great hearts were restarted in the bellies of the walking fortresses. Creche vaults opened, spilling out newborn initiates for their whirring rites. Engineers became battle sorcerers, their limbs sleeved in divine chrome. The chant from a basalt transmission tower rolled across the iron moon. Iron tide. Then from countless transmitters from across the moon as one like a data chorus ringing for all to hear. No survivors. The twin Archons stirred, not yet seen, but already felt in the dreams of their high priests. In the shadowed recesses of the Tropaeum, where the cog thrones of the Archons had sat empty for millennia, the steel of the altar flexed and split, molten with sigil heat, as a single word was branded into its face by forces unspoken. Soon. In the Pyrrhic basilicas, the war priests tuned the klaxon alarms to ancient mustering frequency bands. They spoke in code buried in bloodline. Low pulses bounced through the armored strata of the great mobile colonies, triggering weapons platforms and inheritance caches long sealed. They had known old Kenoma would wake again, just not when. The last holy skirmish had been long ago, but never forgotten. On Chalabia, every enemy remaining was just a war not yet resumed. The general cardinals gathered in the Colosseum engine. High among them, the voice of the twins stood still, a giant of steel and gilded orcish muscle fiber, reading the data shaman's projections as the glimmering graphs revealed one undeniable truth. Somniel had moved. Blood rituals began that hour. Gladiators of the twin ducks chanted in their cage arenas. The forge priests sang until their tongues blistered. The iron scribe conclaves pored over Kenomaic war logs from epochs prior, relearning the rhythms of a sleeping enemy. Chalabia did not fear Kenoma. But Chalabia welcomed the gift of war. A single word was etched into the steel altar by unseen force. Soon. Chapter 12, The Wilderness Part 5. We moved. Not quickly. Not slow either. Marcy kept her mouth shut for once, probably watching our pace, and Brass klimped in silence, favoring his right side but otherwise pressing forward without complaint. I stayed at the front, pushing through the half-collapsed corridors in an already tight space and gliding under broken ducts, trying not to think too hard about what might be leaking from them. The crawlspace layer was worse now. Not more dangerous, not exactly. Just more wrong. Like walking through an old house and realizing all the rooms were way too small. Or like every hallway used to be wider but had somehow shrunk without breaking any geometry. The surfaces were too smooth in places and jagged in others. One flexing turn almost shredded my shoulder. Another dipped suddenly into a slope of tight wire brush filaments that bit into my legs like sandpaper. The worst part was how quiet it all was. When the three of us weren't moving, there was no ambient noise. No wind. No bugs. No distant humming from engines above. The last place like that had been the shrine zone where Ka-Uru had first opened my chip. I led us through three tight junctions, passing warped walls of faded heat-sink tile and fungus rust. We crossed an old ladderway, where a vertical shaft opened below into darkness and above into more darkness. We kept going. I counted every turn. Not just in the back of my head either. I actively tracked it all. Right, low vent pass, incline up. Turn left, ribbed floor panel, fallen scaffold. Twice I backtracked a junction just to make sure the path had been what I thought. My sense of pathing had become clear and linear, like a braid unwinding in reverse. I could almost picture it in full despite the labyrinthian nature of the place. Brask said nothing, but he watched me more than once. He kept his nose down, but I caught him sneaking looks. Marcy didn't comment, but that was usual. If she had noticed a change in me, she wasn't letting on. After a long stretch of ribbed ductwork falling from the office ceiling of cracked amber, we stopped. In what must have been some kind of utility room that had half collapsed and left a small depression against a pipe cluster that still pulsed with coolant. The vibration made the floor warm, thus it was better than anywhere else. We sat there. Quietly. The break gave me a moment to breathe. Not rest. Breathe. My legs burned and my throat felt like I'd been chewing salt. My hands were blood-washed and stained from the earlier fights, and my danger sense had finally lowered from active siren to distant hum. I didn't expect to say anything, but after a long silence, I did. You know, you were absolutely right. If you had told me what was actually out here, I would have refused to leave. Marcy glanced over but said nothing. Brass gave a low, Half-hearted snort. And what do you think the churchmen would do if you refused to their faces? I shrugged. I don't know. I guess I assumed they'd reassign me to a non-combat role. Even as I said it, the words tasted stupid. Hollow. I heard how naive it sounded. Brask tapped the back of his neck. Right where his scruff would have been if he was really a dog. He didn't sneer. Didn't grin. Just said it flatly. Spine full of acid, yes? I winced. Oh right. That. The implant. The failsafe. The first thing they'd installed when I arrived. So much had happened since then. It had only been, what, a week and a half? Maybe less. I remembered the pain. The cold steel. The way Lana hung in a nutrient vat. I shuddered with the memory. Marcy didn't leave me to chew on that too long. She added without looking up. And it happens quite a bit too. I've seen it. Some people break early. But mostly it's when you can't take any more crown levels without losing yourself. You just stop. Refuse to go further. And they hit the button. It's over in a few foamy seconds. That killed the conversation for a while. No one wanted to talk after that. Eventually we stood. Brask tested his weight and, for the first time since the fight, didn't stagger. He walked on his own. Still stiff, but capable. I think we should double back, yes? He offered. Marcy spun, hands on hips. Brask, you got hurt back there. You know what that does to you? Brask rolled his shoulders like a disappointed dog. Yes. But I am better now, no? And I do not want to be in a GOG level tonight. He had a point. I didn't want to say it out loud, but the idea of staying down here, in these wrong bent crawlways where the angles shifted when you weren't looking, made my skin itch. I agree with Brask, I said. This place gives me the creeps. I'll lead the way back. Worst case, we end up in the GOG level and don't sleep. Best case, we make it back to camp and sleep in tomorrow. Marcy didn't argue. We moved again. The way back was slower, not because of wounds or fatigue, but because of caution. The GOG spaces weren't entirely stable, and once or twice we decided to reroute through side shafts that I hadn't marked before. But my memory held. Each bend and broken frame clicked back into place as we moved. My eyes burned from maintaining the memory sight, but I held it up the entire way. My sense of pathing was almost mechanical now. Like muscle memory that I didn't remember training. I noticed scuff marks where we had stepped before, small scratches in the tile from Brask's claws, or my boots all glowed like yellow paint in a video game without the color. We had passed this way. I could see it. Eventually the grid light softened. Above us, the vent channels widened, and I could feel a faint pull of air. Not wind exactly. We weren't far. We stopped once more near a three-way intersection where the walls had partially melted, revealing a cascade of fiber optic cable tangled with exposed bone lattice. No sign of GOG according to Marcy. We rested again. And this time, the rest actually helped. Marcy passed around water tabs. I chewed through the thick, bitter square of hydration paste without complaint. Brask tore his cleanly with one side of his jaw. His tongue flicked over the edge of the wrapper with a reflexive curl. No one spoke. We didn't need to. I leaned back against a cool slab of burnt polymer and closed my eyes. It wasn't peace. But it wasn't fear either. Just a pause in the middle of something. I could still retrace the route in my sight. Every turn. Every junction. I didn't know what that meant yet, but it felt really useful. We waited. Then I opened my eyes again and stood. Surprisingly, we made it back to the hole without incident. The builder had been there, but only briefly. It hadn't lingered. We saw no scourge, no crater of destruction, just tracks through the debris and shattered plating that was oddly neat for something that massive. It looked like it had chased the striders into the field when it couldn't find us. The moss in its wake was bent wrong, still slightly bowed where its eight-legged motion had warped the stalks. We didn't talk at first. We just crouched near the edge of the last descent and watched. Sunlight still filtered through the upper lattice. Not warm anymore. Pale and weary, the kind of light that looked like it had traveled too far and forgot why it came. The ripples in the moss had long since settled. Even the bodies were gone, dragged off by something or someone, and I didn't want to think too hard about either option. We waited until the godlight softened. There was no ideal time to move. Just the moment when waiting became worse than walking. The rope ascent back to our hidden camp took everything I had left. We climbed in shifts. Strata after strata. At least 4 full levels, each one a layer of jagged outcroppings, rust-webbed bulkhead panels, and old ductwork torn open like surgical wounds. It took hours. By the final climb, my hands had blistered under the dried gore. My shoulders felt dislocated. I pushed with my legs, teeth clenched. Gritting up the last lip of steel frame, I flopped onto the floor of our shaded camp with no dignity left. Marcy crawled in after, quiet, eyes scanning. Brask came last, face tight but silent. We were home, or as close to it as anything got in Parthosia. Brask dropped into a crouch, arms resting on his knees. He opened his mouth like he was about to volunteer for first watch. I cut him off. "No. Let me," I said, already peeling off my outer layer and wincing as the blood-stuck fabric ripped free. "Once I'm out, I'll be out for a while. Let me troop through first watch." Brask must have been more tired than he let on, because he didn't argue. He gave a low grunt and settled back, eyes fluttering shut as he leaned against a crate. Marcy gave a tired nod, not quite trusting words yet. I set my back against the cold bulkhead. The camp was dark, but not silent. The background pulse of distant machines. A quiet, wheezing vent. Even the gentle shifting of Brask's chest rising and falling. The stillness was false. My body stopped, but my mind didn't. The hum in my skull had dropped to a low drone, but it never vanished. Danger was still out there, just not immediate. My chip agreed. No flashing alert. No spike of urgency. Just the steady presence of unease. I stared into the dark, let the cold filter through me, and kept watch. It was hours before anything changed. Right before my watch ended or so it felt I noticed it again. That strange internal tick. Like a sundial etched into the back of my skull. My sense of time was getting sharper. Not from sleep cycles or external cues. Just internally anchored. The church would say it was an undeserved blessing. An after effect of God interface or gnosis or some other abstract concept. But I was starting to suspect it was on purpose. Engineered. No natural progression felt this seamless. If Obelisk Systems had found me instead of the church, would it have been different? Would I have been logged, filed, put through protocols and training drills? Would I have been allowed to choose my path through the levels of gnosis? Or were all roads the same in the end, slave to hardwired obedience, one flavor or another? I didn't feel rescued. Not anymore. They said I was to be a martyr. That I was born for this. But who kidnaps and threatens a martyr into service? I hadn't chosen this. They said I was selected. But what they meant was, taken. Brainstem rigged. Spine one command away from melting. Brask's training had helped me survive in terms of muscles. I would not deny that. But even that felt suspect now. He hadn't told me how anything worked. Hadn't explained the chip, the crowns, the world. Just thrown me in and shaped my instincts by training to failure. Like training a dog not to understand, but to obey. If I didn't know English, if I didn't have access to the old writing, the archived whispers of the world before, I might never have realized how much was being hidden. That terrified me more than anything out in the moss. I wondered if Brask and Marcy had gone through the same. Were they broken in slowly? Was there ever a day they understood what they were giving up? Or did they survive too long to question it anymore? I was grateful for them now. For their experience. Their instincts. I stopped judging their behavior the moment I realized how far outside Earth's logic we had drifted. This was not Earth. This was Terra. This was Parthosia. If I wanted to live, I needed to understand the land outside the walls. I needed to humble myself to the maze, to the monsters, to the weird laws of layered terrain and recursive ecosystems. But I didn't have to humble myself to the church. That line was clear. They had fed me. Armed me. Barely kept me alive. But I had more knowledge now about their enemies than about them. That imbalance was telling. My first priority needed to be freedom. Not spiritually, literally. I needed the acid charge out of my spine. If I could remove that, I could move freely. Unshackled. Independent. Not entirely safe, maybe, but no longer on a leash. I was starting to learn how to survive out here. It was brutal. But not impossible. Not if you were smart. Maybe I could live in Parthosia. Alone. I thought of the sermon again. Of the 50 or 60 pale husks and those kneeling in agony. Whipping themselves. Chanting with ruined throats. I thought of how they all had twisted forms, their broken minds. The church called it devotion. It struck me more as cruelty. They were no better than the core that would have been at my home. Maybe worse. Obelisk had at least offered stability, right? Profit a machine that made some attempt to preserve its workforce? The church promised nothing. Only death in exchange for faith. I didn't even realize I'd been staring at the edge of camp until I felt it, a tickle in the back of my brain. The danger sense. Not loud. Not like before. Just a tinkle. I turned slowly, focusing on the memory site, blinking hard as my eyes burned from the strain. Nothing. No movement. No sound. But my head stayed turned toward that same patch of distant webbing, strung out like cables fused into old rebar. I was being watched. But nothing moved. I stayed still for a long time. Eventually, the vibration occurred and I stirred Brask. I moved toward him and tapped his shoulder, then gestured toward the webbing. I made a small circle with my hand and raised an eyebrow. Brask blinked. His brow lifted slightly. Dangerous? His face asked. I shrugged. Then I shook my head. Not immediate. Not hostile. Just noted. He nodded, already half rising. That was it. Our exchange. I laid down slowly. My bones ached with each shift. My head ticked. Compass pathing, 35%. And then I slept. No dreams. Just the weight of exhaustion that dragged me under and held me there. We made it through the night. When I woke, the light was already stirring at the lip of the tent. It wasn't direct. The canopy above filtered it down into softened bands, shifting gently with the breeze that never quite reached us. I lay still for a moment longer, listening. No sounds of approach. No breathing but our own. My danger sense had eased to a low buzz, still present, but no longer taut. I sat up. Marcy was already outside. I heard her boots against metal, light and deliberate. Brask sat by the crate we used as a table, gnawing thoughtfully at a strip of dried meat. He looked better. Not fully restored, but present. He raised a hand when he saw me. I nodded back. I stepped out of the tent. The filtered light gave everything a dusty gold edge. It felt like the first good morning since leaving the walls. Not safe. But steady. We'd survived. We'd killed. We'd bagged meat and brought it back sealed. That was all they'd asked of us. But the simplicity of the mission belied the blood it had cost. I sat down beside the others. Marcy passed me a sealed ration pack. Inside was still warm protein rations. Cooked lightly over one of Brask's folding plates. It tasted like a mix between liver and old duck. I chewed in silence. It was probably derived from the same meat source we'd just hunted. The silence felt earned. Reverent. I understood now why Marcy insisted on it. I had thought it a petty formality. A control reflex. It wasn't. It was a method of safety from the wilds of this hellscape. Brask broke it first once we had removed the smell of food and buried anything the wilds could smell, his voice low. We go again today, yes? I smell something rich in the wind. New game. Fresh track. Marcy groaned. No, Brask. No game. He tilted his head like a scolded dog. But we are strong now, yes? We eat. We've rest. Good time for second hunt. Marcy shook her head, setting down her food carefully. No. We have what we need. And you nearly snapped last time. We stick to the plan. Get mushrooms. Then back. Mushrooms, Brask repeated like it was an insult. I chuckled quietly. Marcy shot me a look but didn't reprimand it. Brask stood up and stretched, tail flicking. Just saying. The day is good. My nose is good. Your judgment's off, Marcy said. We don't push when we don't have to. I swallowed and leaned back against the warm metal. She's right. We've earned a quiet day. I'd like to spend it not getting stabbed. Brask sighed through his nose but didn't argue. I suspected he wasn't really disappointed. He just liked the idea of hunting. There was a joy in him I hadn't expected, something almost playful. Also, Marcy added, we only have a day to make it back if we do this. I blinked, halfway through counting the days on my fingers. Wait, what? She raised an eyebrow. Yeah. 5-day week. She looked at me with undisguised confusion. I thought we had 2 more days, I said slowly. Brask let out a single huff of laughter. What? A week is 5 days, yes? 5 days a week. You're telling me we only have 2 days left? Marcy nodded. Yep. Day 4 now. Back tomorrow. Debrief, cleanse, whatever's next. That's the job cycle. I stared at them both, then down at my hands. No weekends. No breaks. Just 5 days and done. Yeah? That's the system. What are weekends? Never mind anyway, she said. Best get used to it. Of course it is, I said. She smirked. We packed in quiet, each of us moving without needing instruction. The ropes were coiled. Packs adjusted. I rechecked the sealant bags, the weight of them heavy but satisfying in my grip, and then we buried them again. We moved northward? Not sure how I knew that. Away from the moss fields, into older structure. The terrain shifted fast. No rolling greens here. Just angles and shadow. The ductwork ahead loomed like an abandoned skyscraper, ribs of fen housing frozen in place. The fans were enormous. Each one the width of a train turntable. Most were fused in rust or jammed with decades of detritus. The air here was still. Stale, but breathable. Something in the massive tunnels created wind currents just strong enough to keep it from stagnating entirely. I kept an eye out for movement. Memory sight flickered now and then. Nothing flagged me as hostile. Not yet. We entered the primary duct with Brask in the center. I took point. Marcy covered our rear. It was a good rotation. My footing was solid now. I moved quiet. Measured. Brask sniffed occasionally, his muzzle twitching. Marcy's eyes never left the side vents. "Anything to look for in particular?" I asked. "Brown-capped spore clusters," Marcy said. "They grow in the coolant grooves. Look for green-blue frost-like patterns. They cluster around that." I nodded. "Copy that." Brask gave a pleased grunt. "You've learned fast." Trying. The deeper we moved into the duct, the more unnatural it felt. Not alien. Just old. Person-made? But long past the point of recognition. The grooves in the metal were worn smooth by friction. Dust spiraled in airless pockets. We passed broken turbines tall enough to house apartments. One had collapsed sideways, forming a kind of bridge to a higher ledge. Marcy marked it on her slate. I paused beside a split seam where something had gnawed through insulation. Inside the gap, I saw the delicate web of fungus starting to bloom. Not spore clusters. But something alive. "We're not alone in here," I murmured. Marcy stepped closer. "We never are." Brask just sniffed, then moved ahead. "We will not be hunted today. Today, we are only foraging." I didn't disagree. But I still watched the dark. Chapter 13, The Wilderness Part 6. The floor of the ductwork was surprisingly navigable, though parts of it felt like walking on the inside of a gutted airship. Metal panels peeled up where pressure had warped the base structure, and support struts jutted through at odd angles, like ribs snapped inward. We picked our way across it, and Brask gradually drifted to the front, nose low, ears flicking with that twitchy alertness I was beginning to understand. He was happy. Not calm. Hugh was never calm, but he was content. Every few steps, he stopped and nudged a seam or sniffed a vent, then moved on with a quiet huff. It didn't take long to find the first cluster. Marcy spotted it. The spore cap was no larger than her palm, but a faint halo of turquoise-like frost etched the grooved surface beneath it. She tapped the surrounding pipe with her boot. No echo. "Good spot," I said. She grinned. "Keep your eyes open. If you see one, there's usually a patch. They like old coolant lines." Brask leaned in, sniffed once, and exhaled sharply. "Mildly tasty. But decent in stew. No twist in the spores? Good enough for stew, say?" He licked the air thoughtfully. "Yes. But only small dose. This kind does not like to be dried." I marked the location on the slate in my mind. Marcy retrieved a waxed pouch and began carefully cutting the caps free with a dull-bladed field knife. Her movements were practiced. Not fast, but smooth. Brask watched her with naked interest. When she handed me the pouch, he cleared his throat. "Marcy," he said, half distracted, holding up a cap between two claws. "Do you think I'm a good picker? This one looks fresh, yes?" She paused. Looked at him sideways. "You mean because it's fresh looking?" He barked a short laugh, flicking his tail. "No. Because it hides secrets." She gave him a flat look. "That doesn't even make sense." "It makes sense to me," he said proudly. "It is a good joke, yes?" I coughed into my glove to hide the grin. Brask turned and started down the next corridor, suddenly eager. We found more clusters as we moved. Some wedged into corners of ancient fan wells. Others clinging to the edges of broken pipe seams. The air was damp here. Metallic. But it carried the scent of rotten earth. A living rot. Something fertile. It was oddly like a fungus forest for all it was inside a massive ductwork. We moved carefully. Quietly. The tension from before had ebbed, replaced by a kind of light focus. A slice of life. Not survival. Just foraging. Brask fetched several clusters himself, bringing them to Marcy with tail-wagging satisfaction. She accepted them without much reaction, but I caught the faintest hint of a smile. We took our time. At one point, we sat on the edge of a broken ventilation ring and shared the last of the rations from the morning. Marcy insisted we boil anything new first, even the safe spores. "Field rule," she said. "Never trust uncooked fungus unless you're starving. Even the mild ones can twist you in ways you don't expect." "Like what?" She tapped the side of her head. "False memories. Ghost sounds. Sometimes your poops are so bad and you drop into the rose loop." "That's happened to you?" "Once. My third run. I was learning terrain cataloging. Ate a bad batch and woke up 3 hours later convinced I was a cartographer named Olm. Brask snorted. You made a fine Olm. Though the aftermath was rather smelly. Shut up. The laughter was real, even if quiet. I leaned back and looked up at the crisscrossed beams overhead. The structure groaned now and then, old stress moaning through the bones of the world. But it felt less hostile here. Like a place between things. We gathered steadily, marking safe patches and storing what we could. The packs grew heavier. Our pace slowed. Then the floor shifted. It was subtle at first. A slight sway. A resonance in the back of my jaw. Brask froze. Ears sharp. Marcy stood. Did you feel? A sound like the entire world taking a slow breath echoed up from below. The duct groaned. Then shuddered. Quake, Brask said, voice low. Hold. I braced against the wall. Marcy crouched near the fan housing. A deep tremor passed through the ductwork, not a single sharp jolt but a series of rolling pulses. Somewhere deeper in the structure, something groaned, twisted, and collapsed with a sound like distant thunder. Dust rained from the ceiling seams. Fungal webs fluttered. The air thickened. Then stillness. We stayed frozen another minute. Brask sniffed once. No breach nor fall nearby. Marcy nodded. Lucky. Could have been a lot worse. I exhaled slowly. Still feel like we're being watched. Brask lowered his head. Then let them watch. We are still moving. We gathered the rest of our bags. The silence that followed was heavier than before. But we kept going. The quake had passed. But the calm was gone. As we continued on, Brask kept his head low and ears perked. After a long stretch without speaking, I broke the silence. Brask, I asked, more out of curiosity than strategy, what was it like where you grew up? He made a rumbling sound in his throat, not quite a growl, more like a purr. Ah, you want stories, yes? I tell you then. My people, we lived beneath the old drainworks of Kiel Ziggurats since before the flooding times. We called it the Maze of Bronze. Not bronze really, just old pipes. But the name stuck. Marcy raised an eyebrow. Wasn't that all waste reclamation? Brask grinned wide enough to flash a few sharp teeth. Yes. But we claimed it. Made homes and chambers the humans forgot. My grandmother used to say the pipes were veins of the slumbering god. We walked them like hunters, proud and quiet. She said every time the fan cycled on, it was the god stirring in sleep, and we had to tread softer. We kept maps scratched into old polymer sheets, passed down by claw and whisper. The old ones taught us which pipes groaned loudest and which hummed low when walked. We never got lost. We knew it better than the city above. You were scavengers then? I asked. We were conquerors, Brask said, and gave a happy flick of his tail. Of mold farms and grease traps. The humans never saw us, they assumed the systems in our domain were automated. We learned their movements, knew their routes. Stole their rations. Opened valves to make noise in other places while we feasted. Outsmarted them always. Marcy snorted. So you were pipe bandits. Tribal workers, he corrected with pride. But clever. We danced when the vents sighed and held ceremonies when the lights went red. We kept our dead in old filtration tanks. Whole generations living on forgotten circuits. I miss it sometimes. There was no shame in his voice. No embellishment either. Just a distant fondness, like a memory rubbed smooth by repetition. I didn't laugh. Sounds like home, I said quietly. He gave me a glance and a soft grunt in return. Brask slowed his steps, his ears twitching toward Marcy. You talk now, yes? About the intranet. The world behind the light. You always say it is not for me, but I wish to know. Marcy blinked, caught off guard. You really want to know? Yes, Brask said with unusual seriousness. Even if it is dangerous. Even if I cannot go there. I want to understand. She gave a long breath through her nose and glanced my way. You sure you're ready for that kind of confusion? Brask nodded once. Marcy's expression dimmed a little as she looked ahead. All right, she said. I'll tell you what I can. Just remember this isn't something I asked for either. Brask's tail flicked, but he stayed quiet, attentive. I adjusted the pack on my shoulder and gave her space. She took a breath. The medical corp that took me in wasn't really a medical corporation, not in the way you think. They used the name for cover. They were a research node buried under 5 levels of burn tape and clearances, disguised as a charity provider. They recruited damaged people, vulnerable ones, told us we could be useful again. Her voice wavered, just a little. Then they started testing us against the older intranets. Factional layers. Ghost systems. Places no one had touched since the Sundering. Brask looked up at her. And they sent you in? They put chips in us, she said. Randrills in blackout tanks. If your mind could handle the overlap without fracturing, they moved you up the tower. I made it higher than most. There were 7 floors. I only made it to 5. I didn't speak. There was nothing I could say and they called the worlds I entered simulacrum mirrors, but they weren't mirrors. They were self-aware data nests. Broken, buried, angry. Some were from old political AI factions. Others had no known source. You'd open one thread and fall into a memory of something that had never happened or a war no one remembered. A language with no keys to decipher them. I spent a year being forced into one structure that kept me believing I was a tower's defense system. I kept killing things that weren't real until I forgot I was human over and over again. She stopped and cleared her throat. Eventually, they said I was no longer reliable. Deployed me once or twice into walled space. Then they cut me loose. I think they expected me to go mad or burn out. But I didn't. I outlasted their funding. I guess that means I was a decent tool. Brask didn't say anything right away. Then, solemnly, you walked far. Still walking, she said. We kept walking. Then the quake hit for real. There was no warning this time. No subtle sway. No distant groan. Just a sudden, concussive shift in pressure that slammed through the ductwork like a dropped engine block. The ground beneath our feet lurched hard enough to send me staggering into the wall. Metal screamed. Beams howled. Something far below under the floor snapped with a shudder that felt like the end of something permanent. Down, Marcy yelled. We dropped, bracing as a second wave rolled through. Dust and fungal debris cascaded like ash. Brask crouched low, his tail curled tight around one leg, ears flat. It passed slower this time. Longer. As if the quake had to finish what the last one started. When the movement stopped, we stayed down, hearts thudding. My hands were shaking. Marcy blinked grit from her eyes and looked toward the duct spine. That wasn't a just tremor, it caused something. That was structural failure somewhere deep. Maybe 2 levels down. Brask sniffed hard. Smells like cracked rotors. Airflow's gone. I wiped my mouth. My teeth ached from the vibration. Do we go back? Marcy hesitated. Then nodded. We discuss it at camp. I don't want to be in here if it collapses. Not with weight like that moving. Brask said nothing. But his claws stayed half buried in the metal floor. The light was still steady. But the comm had shattered. We doubled our pace. No one said it, but the silence had changed. The warm quiet of before was gone. Every clink of metal, every groan of the distant structure now carried weight. We moved in a tight formation, Brask ahead again, tail low and sweeping, Marcy and I behind, checking every blind corner twice. By the time we reached camp, sweat clung to my back in cold patches. The ductwork had shifted subtly on the return path, just enough to make each junction feel unfamiliar. We had to stop twice and retrace turns until my memory confirmed a seam or cracked bracket. Still, we made it. The brush pile concealing the hide still stood. Our perimeter signal threads remained intact. Once inside, we set the packs down in a single tired heap. I knelt beside mine and exhaled slowly. We can't stay, I said. Not after that. Marcy rubbed her hands down the front of her pants, then looked toward the seam where we'd come in. We were lucky twice. We won't be again. Brask gave a low growl of disagreement in his throat, not aimed at us but at the ground beneath. We are strong now. We could stay higher in the vents. Even try further out. There are paths yet to tread. I smell them. Smell all you want, Marcy muttered. It doesn't change the fact that quake could have killed us. Yes, Brask admitted, tail flicking in frustration, but it didn't. We don't know what else that shake broke, I said, more tired than anything. The duct shifted. It's different now. We had to re-navigate just to get back here. You want to do that after dark? He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Thoughtful. Not entirely convinced. Marcy stepped in beside me. I'm not saying we pull the plug on the whole run, but I think we fall back to the last clean extraction and regroup. Let the strata settle. I do not like it, Brask grumbled, ears angling downward. But I understand it. He took a slow breath, then glanced at the full pouches of mushrooms, clearly reluctant. Next time we hunt longer. I find better paths. Next time, I agreed. That seemed to settle it. Not joyfully. Not easily. But we'd earned the right to retreat. Marcy nodded. We felt a load shift. We don't know how deep it went. But it wasn't local. Brask unslung his pack with a grunt. We head to extraction, yes? There was no vote. No delay. We began packing for real. Anything not essential got left behind. Marcy broke down the tent while I folded the emergency signal mirror. Brask repacked the spore finds with a care I hadn't expected. We didn't linger. We didn't need to. The decision had already been made the moment the quake hit. We were not going to risk sleeping inside Parthosia tonight. The journey to the extraction gate was marked by a quiet urgency. Brask grumbled under his breath the entire way, occasionally sniffing the air or pausing to examine strange patches of mold or claw marks, but never actually stopping. He wasn't happy. He was tense, twitching, like a hunter pulled from a chase too early. I led us in a slow arc around the sectors we'd flagged unstable. It cost us time, but the new path skirted near a fan shaft where the airflow felt steadier. Brask kept pace but muttered complaints about missed trails and promising scents the whole way. Eventually, the corridor began to slant upward. The seams on the walls grew cleaner. The fungal growths thinned. Light strips embedded in the walls flickered back to a glow instead of pulsing random shades. We were close. When we reached the extraction platform, it was guarded, though maybe watched was a better word. Two figures in white robes stood just past the threshold, their forms lanky and expressionless. They wore the full formal ingress garb, pointed hoods in pale linen, and white faceplates with narrow slits. No insignia, no rank, just the plain black stripe and monochrome authority of the church's handlers. One raised a gloved hand and gestured us forward. No words. The gate behind them was already creaking open. Brask tilted his head. "They always look like that?" "Always," Marcy said. She didn't slow her pace. I swallowed hard and fell in behind them, watching those blank masks track our movements. They looked way too much like the clan. Whatever waited inside with the church, it would be a different kind of danger. But we were done sleeping in the wild. For now. The lift that brought us back up into the church's holding halls shuddered slightly on its tracks. A dull hydraulic hiss marked each meter climbed. No one spoke. Brask leaned against the frame, the bags of sealed fungi slung over one shoulder like some ancient forager returning from the swamps. Marcy stood at the control column, watching the indicator dials. I just stared ahead. The light in here was dim but clean. Clinical. The hum of the old systems vibrated in my knees. When the doors slid open, we stepped out into a narrow hallway lined with white polycrete. The walls were scrubbed. Not new. But maintained. And that was more disquieting than the wild. 3 handlers waited just beyond. All wore the same pointed robes and stark masks, though their armbands were different colors. 1 red. 2 blue. No words. Just a curt nod and a gesture to follow. We were taken through a decontamination corridor. Preacher attendants hissed disdainful prayers. Misters painted the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and burning copper. Marcy didn't flinch. Brask sneezed once, violently. I winced as the spray got in my eyes. It tingled. Not painful. Just enough to remind you who controlled the filters. Then the misters stopped. We passed into the intake room. Medical staff waited here, not priests exactly, but gray coat auxiliaries that had the same feeling. Each of us was led to a separate bench for evaluation. "Stripped to base layer," my attendant said. Her voice was flat. No inflection. No cruelty either. Just the voice of someone running a checklist. I obeyed. The layers came off. The robe dropped easily. She scanned my body and made a note on a flickering tablet. Compass gnosis showing stable progression. Timer updated. Injury log within acceptable range. No anomalies active. I blinked. "So that's a good thing?" She didn't answer. Just moved to the next point. A needle went into my neck. Cold flush. Something clear. "You will receive clearance shortly. Recovery dormitory C. Keep the mask on in transition." A mask was handed to me. It was a half-filter breather marked with my cohort code. I put it on. Didn't argue. Across the room, I caught a glimpse of Marcy being let out already, her eyes distant. Brask looked back at me once as they escorted him. His tail drooped but didn't tuck. Still proud. The handlers didn't follow. They disappeared back toward the ingress gate. We were ushered through white halls. The dormitories here weren't cruel, just hollow. Again, no personal effects. No warmth. I was led into a long room with rows of sleep cots, each with a steel locker beside it. 6 others were here already. 2 unconscious. 1 praying. 1 whispering into a small ceramic idol clutched tight in his hands. The others just sat. I found an empty cot and lowered myself onto it. My body screamed in relief. My back, my knees, the bruises I'd stopped counting. It caught up all at once. There would be debriefs later. Washdown, dream recounting, slate clearing, memory interviews. But not tonight. Tonight we were allowed to rest. Small mercy. The stone tunnels of Requieta, City of Graves, ran deeper than any station above could chart. Far deeper than the broken bones of Horus Yard, deeper than the tunnel wards that the sewer tribes claimed as myth. Even the Gogs, when they emerged to feed from ancient vents or take on coolant in the boiling reservoirs, would not press this far. Deeper yet in the earth of Terra than the ancient abandoned lava tubes the swarmers used to navigate the depths of the world. Here, the stone was worn smooth by devotion. By procession. By pilgrimage. It was neither cold nor warm. The temperature remained fixed by decree, measured against the ancient scrolls that defined the proper range for divine contemplation and hiding from the deepest scans. Rows of tall glass lamps scuttered in recesses along the hall, their glow flickering gold against the wet black floor. Two figures walk side by side through the processional lane. "They multiply," said Father Liquidus. He was thin in the face, square in the shoulders, the long braid of his order looped once around his throat in a loose collar. Every census tabulation returns higher. By thousands. Not drifters nor pilgrims anymore but births. And no one knows why. No one wants to know why, Father Rowan replied, voice low. His mask was hooked at the hip, not on his face. He spoke freely here. You can only tell a man the world has ended for so long before he starts making one of his own. Liquidus shook his head. I warned the stewards. When you allow the layman too much space, he fills it with indulgence. Street vendors. Dancing in the tertiary wards. Children. Children are a symptom, not a vice, Rowan murmured. And indulgence is a kind of worship. The tunnel opened into a quiet plaza bathed in gentle amber light. Above them rose the archival pillars of the dream schema's inner cloister. Monks moved in slow lines, their robes dragging, their movements rehearsed. Each carried a vessel of flickering saline, held aloft in both hands. Beyond them, through the mist, the market buzzed. The outer cloister had not been silenced. It had never been meant to. Stalls of sanctioned goods and censored produce lined the outer edge. Synthetic coffee. Mold loaves. Scented ash sticks. Vellum fortunes bound in sterile wrap. Not black market, not heretical, it was just human. Look at them, Rowan said, gesturing with his jaw. We taught them to fear the deceivers. We taught them the weight of the schema. They listened. They obeyed. Now they live again. Liquidus narrowed his eyes. This cannot last. It already has. We were meant to deliver them from chaos. Not permit them to reinvent it with cleaner tools. Rowan paused beside a fountain where a child fed chipped wax into the mouth of a stone cherub. The statue swallowed it with a hiss. You speak as if the schema was ever meant to sterilize, Rowan said. But it's a loom. And looms weave. Liquidus did not answer at first. He folded his arms and watched the crowd. There are whispers, he said. Of autonomy nodes. Of hidden rights. Some have begun worshipping without sanction. And yet they report for debrief, Rowan said. They remain within doctrine. For now. Rowan sighed. There are days I think the old faith should have died in the sundering. But it didn't. Because something deeper still breathes beneath it. And it will keep breathing, whether we shroud it in silence or let it sing. They stood there for a while longer, watching the golden light flicker over the faces of the faithful. Rowan finally stepped forward, leaving Liquidus behind. Come, he said. We'll walk the dream wards. Then you may tell me how best to manage the miracle. I would hear your thoughts, too, on the matter of the cohorts. Liquidus hesitated. The tainted? The cohorts kept at Horus Yard, Rowan clarified. Away from the penitent. Segregated by edict, but still very much of our number. They are heretics, Liquidus said slowly. Their blood runs foul. Their minds are broken. And yet they are sent out where the dream turns hostile. It is their blood, foul or not, that we test the fractures with. They survive where others do not. Liquidus frowned. That is not survival. That is exposure. The schema accepts utility in many forms, Rowan replied. Even if it was born in failure. We must reckon with that. They should not return here, Liquidus said, voice colder now. Not to Requieta. No matter what. They will not. But you and I both know their place is changing. The dream moves. It always does. Liquidus said nothing more. Come, Rowan repeated, his voice gentler. We will walk. And in walking, prepare ourselves for what must follow. Liquidus followed. The city of the graves pulsed quietly around them. Not dead. Not yet. Chapter 14, Returning to the Yard. The next 2 days were dull in the way that only bureaucracy could make excruciating. Even after returning to the walls of Horus Yard, we were kept under watch. Scrubbed again. Passed through wash fields, tested for trace toxins, spores, psychic bleed. They scanned the crown signatures behind our eyes and checked for something called dream leakage with an odd want. No one spoke to us. Not the scrubbers, not the wardens, not the robe technicians with their silver cords and wine-colored gloves. Brass grumbled through most of it. Marcy didn't say anything at all. I just tried not to fall asleep on my feet. When they finally let us back into the quarantine dormitory, I didn't even care that the bunk was thin and the air recycled wrong. I found an empty cot and lowered myself onto it. My body screamed in relief. My back, my knees, the bruises I'd stopped counting. It caught up all at once. There would be debriefs later. Washdown, dream recounting, slate clearing, memory interviews. But not tonight. Tonight we were allowed to rest a small mercy. But morning always came. Captain Lenandris met us in the slate chamber just after the rise. Same slightly different robes, same tired look. The man seemed carved from damp paper and worry. He puffed on his pipe, some synthetic fungal blend that turned the air a bruised yellow. I'd noticed the clergy avoided standing too close when he lit it. We sat across from him on the plain stone benches. Me, Brask, Marcy. Back together again, at least for the purposes of record-keeping. Report, Lenandris said, eyes narrowing as the pipe smoke curled upward. Brask leaned forward, hands clasped like a storyteller settling in for a performance. We descended through 4 strata, surviving not only an attack by Striders, but an encounter with a full builder sentinel. We acquired meat samples and foraged mushrooms. My companions were brave. I was, of course, invaluable. Of course, Lenandris muttered, scribbling something on his slate. Marcy shot Brask a look, but said nothing. I kept quiet, too. There was a rhythm to how the captain ran things, and interrupting it usually meant more questions. Brask continued with exaggerated flair. We constructed a tent shelter using materials available in the wild. I handled first watch. We did not suffer fatalities, despite several quakes of unnatural origin. Unnatural how? Lenandris asked. I cleared my throat. There were aftershocks, sure. But one of them it was near the end and it felt like something bigger. Not just tectonic shift. There was a sound, like a groan through the layers. Lenandris glanced up from his slate. Sound of what? Machine? Breach? I don't know. Just big. Did the builder sentinel you encountered descend deeper? Brask nodded. Yes. We believe it gave chase to the Striders. Its track impressions were deep. Fresh. It followed them into the moss basin. Lenandris grunted. That was the first time he looked genuinely unsettled. Noted. We haven't had builder descent this shallow in 7 cycles. Shallow? I asked. Relatively. You were already near the upper decay ridge. If it came up that far. We need to remark the kill zones. He didn't speak for a while after that. Just tapped his stylus against the slate as the room settled into silence. Anything else? He finally asked. I saw something watching us near the silk proths, I said. Didn't move. I didn't actually see it. Just a feeling. You think it was an interface bleed? Some hallucination? No. Felt primitive, something alive, maybe insectal? Noted. He scratched another mark, then stood. That will do. You're cleared to return to quarters. The sermon today is required. Standard admonitions follow. Then you prepare for re-entry. Brask stood, stretched until his back popped, and gave a lazy smile. I wish to sleep in my own bed tonight, yes? Enjoy it, Lenandris muttered. It may be your last. We filed out together, the air stale in the narrow corridor. Brask exhaled. That was not so bad. I almost like Lenandris. He reminds me of a drying sewer tortoise. Marcy smirked. You flirted with him through half the report. I was being charming, Brask protested. You embellished every part of it, I added. Yes, Brask said simply. Would you rather I undersell our heroic deeds? We turned the corner toward the dormitories when Marcy glanced back at me. Don't forget the sermon. I paused. My body, which had just begun to relax, tensed again. Wait. We have to go back in tomorrow? They both turned. Brask tilted his head. Do you think they let the heretics rest? No? I said, my voice already flat. Brask clapped me on the shoulder. They do. Only very rarely. I didn't move. I just stood there while my thoughts tried to line up. I felt the comfort of the cot earlier like a lie, something I shouldn't have trusted. The quiet joy of having survived our first field cycle dissolved like sugar in rain. "You okay?" Marcy asked. "Just thinking," I said. They waited. "About what?" Brask asked. I didn't answer that. And the silence that followed was not cruel. We kept walking. Walking into the main shared space of Horace Yard was almost nostalgic, which was strange given we'd only been gone a week. But after the trauma-bonded hell Brask had guided me through, the sterile dormitory with its harsh lights and cold concrete rooms looked like a luxury resort. My little corner of the cell block, the cot that groaned just the right way when I sat, the scratched wall I'd half memorized, and it was all so stupidly precious now. It had been safe. And I hadn't realized how badly I craved safety. Still, we only had one day, or part of one anyway, before the cycle turned again. The rest wouldn't last. That part had sunk in. So, before I let myself get too comfortable, I mumbled something about needing a moment and split off from Brask and Marcy. They didn't protest. Brask just gave a shrug and Marcy nodded once, her eyes a little more tired than yesterday. I stepped into my assigned room and shut the door with a quiet click. Then I just stood there, letting the stillness settle. Without clocks, it was hard to know how long I had until the sermon. The air filters hummed softly above me. No voices. No alarms. No cries from the deep or alien thuds echoing through floor plates. Just stale quiet. I sat down and let myself feel it. Only then did I realize how tight my chest had been. Not from the field work, not from the exhaustion, but from holding everything in. I'd been surviving, reacting, thinking fast and moving faster. But now? Now I was just a person sitting in a cell again and too dirty to be called clean. I hadn't grieved for or processed anything. Not properly. Not for my old life. Not for the version of myself that had existed before Parthosia and before the crown had bonded to my spine like a cursed inheritance. I thought back to the days before. Real days. Marked by clocks, work shifts, and cheap LED screens. Life on Earth was messy, crowded, and full of traffic, yes, but it was also familiar. I remembered waking up to alarms, not watching rotations. Fast food wrappers, not ration tabs. Streaming shows, not sermons. People argued over politics, prices, and parking spots. It was not survival. Cities were sometimes broken but running, and most people didn't know how close everything was to unraveling. It had felt shallow at the time. Manufactured. Overstimulated. But it was civilization. Predictable and comfortable. Here everything was raw and layered in dust. No warnings, no second chances. Only wilds, whispers, and the looming shape of masked figures. What hurt most was how quickly I had adjusted. And how little that adjustment had helped me understand. They'd said I would be a martyr. That my life was already signed away. But I hadn't understood that it meant not what it truly meant, and it meant I was disposable. That if I fell tomorrow, no one would blink. That the only thing worse than death in the wilds was living long enough to understand what the word tool meant when the Church of the Dreamer used it. The thought made me sick. They didn't want to waste tools, they said. But they would. And gladly. The acid bomb in my spine was a reminder. The way Brask trained me without ever answering the questions I didn't know to ask, this was the real lesson. Keep me confused. Keep me moving. Keep me moving as long as I am useful. But I had advantages. A language, first of all. English. The cursed birthright of my soul. I could read things they thought unreadable. Manuals, graffiti, broken screens from before the fall. The world hadn't been built for them. It had been built for me. Or for the kind of people I used to be among. I wondered if Obelisk Systems had ever meant to find me. Or if they had already written me off as a ghost. One more failed upload in a world of failed promises. Would they have guided me through the Gnosis levels? Set up simulations, staged trials, turned the climb into a proper onboarding? Maybe, and I had thought about it 100 times up till now. Or maybe they would have just strapped me to a bench and watched until I broke. Everett's memory wasn't kind, though not to me. In retrospect, Everett hadn't known any better. He remembered humans who lived under the corporation without caste-stamped jobs and gene-locked contracts were basically livestock. They were kept fed and pacified with an all-you-can-eat buffet of entertainment and stimulus. The system pretended to be capitalistic, but it was only a shadow of it. You could still make choices, but those choices were stacked. If you wanted more, you paid in pieces of yourself. Her parents had sacrificed something that made them human and, in return, the Corps had given them the benefit they thought she wanted. A pound of flesh, only in her case it had taken more than one. Everett's own trade had been quieter. He had grown up in a family unit, a living arrangement you signed for that stripped away most of the messy, emotional parts of family life in exchange for a cleaner, more stable station. It was one of the privileges that let him move freely through the city without constant checks or harassment. He was not anywhere near the highest tier, and he knew it. But he had enough clearance to walk the streets, flash his credentials when needed. I shoved the memories away and I thought of Brask and Marcy. How had they survived it? Did they even question it anymore? Had they found a way to believe in the church's dogma, or was it just resignation? Brask had always felt like a survivor. Not cynical, just adaptive. Like the world couldn't kill him unless it got very, very lucky. Marcy was different. More like a ghost already. The corporation had taken more than just her nerves. Her silences were full of old screams she never voiced. I pressed my fingers to my eyes until the headache buzzed. It was better than crying. Time passed. The sermon would come soon. And after that, the wilds again. I wanted out. Not just out of Horus Yard, or the jungle of Parthosia, or the church. I wanted out of the framework entirely. Out of the spine bomb leash. Out of the systems. Out of this world or universe entirely. At minimum I wanted to be free. But freedom would mean losing everything. Comfort. Food. Shelter. Medicine. Information. It would mean surviving in a landscape that hated the shape of human life. And I wasn't ready. Not yet. Still, a plan was forming. Slippery, vague, but growing in the back of my skull like a nerve signal that hadn't fully fired. First goal, remove the acid trigger. Then I could breathe. Then I could think. Until then, I would smile at the sermons, listen to the fathers speak, and keep a careful eye for the paths back out. But that was for later. For now, I waited in my room. And when the knocks finally rang from the procession outside my bedroom, alerting the other damned, I rose. Time to pretend again. Time to show them I was still useful. I joined the flow of stained brown-robed bodies as they made their way down the central corridor, each one silent save for the shuffle of cloth and the soft brush of feet against the smoothed flooring. The sermon hadn't started yet, but everyone moved religiously as though it had. Routine had its own gravity in Horus Yard. I recognized a few faces from our cohort from the last time they were tense, marked by half-healed cuts and swollen joints. The field left its traces in a way I hadn't understood before. I eased into place behind one of them and kept pace, letting the rhythm carry me. The corridors opened into the congregation hall slowly, like a mouth yawning wide. Dim lights traced up the vertical ribs of the chamber, casting long shadows that blurred into the haze of incense and recycled air. Marcy and Brask were already there. I spotted them near the fourth row of penitents, just left of the main aisle. Brask was hunched slightly, his shoulder pressed to Marcy's. She didn't pull away. I made my way over and stood beside them without a word. Brask nodded once. "You look rested." "I'm not," I said. "But I'll survive." Marcy's gaze was fixed on the far end of the room. The dais, still unoccupied. "You think it'll be Liquidus again?" I asked. She shifted, non-committal. "Could be. I hope not Liquidus," Brask muttered. "He always brings the smelly wax." That turned a flicker of amusement from Marcy, but it didn't last. I scanned the room again. Near the far edge, where the Puritan faction sat in their clustered whites, one of them caught my eye because they were trembling. Subtly, like a wire under strain. Another had their hands locked together so tightly their knuckles had gone bloodless. They weren't praying. Not really. "You see that?" I murmured. Brask followed my gaze. His brow lowered. Puritans are always like that. Too much belief, not enough understanding. Marcy didn't look away from the dais. Or maybe they know something we don't. Before I could ask what she meant, a hush rippled through the hall. Footsteps, calm and deliberate, echoed across the stone. Then came the dry sound of a robe's hem brushing polished ground. Father Rowan stepped up to the platform. Eyes open. Face bare. I waited in my room. And when the knocks finally rang from the procession outside my bedroom, alerting the other damned, I rose. Time to pretend again. Time to be a believer. The incense curled higher as Father Rowan mounted the dais. His presence carried weight without flourish. No theatrics. Just the stillness of a man who believed in silence more than spectacle. He did not look at any of us individually, instead his gaze remained slightly above our heads, as if addressing something beyond the room. "Unwilling apostates. Cohorts of the 8th and 10th. You have returned. And so you are senior spirits to be washed anew." His voice held that grainy resonance I'd come to associate with him during the few times I had heard him speak, like a warm frequency buried beneath cold metal. Each foray into the world is a hymn. Each wound, a stanza. And when you return, the dreamer listens. The pain is not wasted. The blood is not forgotten. It runs in the sluice of memory, where all martyrs float. A pause, long and considered. But this is not praise. This is not a reward. This is continuity. You do what you were shaped to do. As tools must. As faithful must. And in so doing, you strengthen the schema of the dreamer. Marcy leaned slightly toward me, just enough that her lips were near my ear. He sounds like a Minoris. You ever heard one? I shook my head, careful not to draw attention. She continued, barely audible. Only ever saw one once. They don't speak like the others. Their voices feel warm. Rowan's getting close. I didn't know what that meant. But the back of my neck prickled. Across the chamber, the Puritan who had been trembling earlier was now outright twitching. He held a strip of barbed flail in one hand, the other gripping a leather handle. With each verse Rowan gave, he lashed the flail across his own shoulders. Hard enough to bleed, enough to leave lines of rended flesh. Penance, in public. Marcy had explained once it had something about cycles of purification. The dreamer didn't punish, she revealed. And when the body quivered, that was the soul trying to wake up. I didn't believe that. But I kept my face still and my eyes forward. Rowan continued. You have seen a glimpse of the redemption. You have touched the cursed crust and tasted the lost strata. But more than that. You have endured it. You, the errant pieces, dragged back into shape. Brask shifted beside me. I glanced at him, and he mouthed the words silently at me. Wah wah wah. Marcy didn't move at all. I cracked a smile. The dreamer is not watching, Rowan said, voice rising just slightly. The dreamer is being watched. And when you kneel, you let the world know where we stand. You the broken nails of the dreamer. The man with the flail finally dropped it. He was breathing hard now. Wet, heaving sobs through clenched teeth. Still no one stopped him. Then the shaking began. Not just from the man, but from something deeper. A wrongness that spread out from his bones like cracking ice. I felt it before I saw it cold washed over me that wasn't there, part of me picking up the frequency, the pitch of the world bending around him. Brask, I said low. Something's happening. Brask's nostrils flared. His body quivers, yes? It must be the time or no? It's not broadcasting. Marcy's voice dropped. That's not possible. The sensors. The man's spine arched like a bowstring and something tore in his throat. It wasn't a scream. It was a gurgled, monstrous intake of breath that sounded like it wanted to drag the room in with it. Then came the wet pop of vertebrae pulling apart. The man's robe split down the back with a sickening tear, the seams unraveling like thread scorched from the inside. A ripple passed beneath his skin, not like shivering but like something else entirely, as though his muscles had become fluid and forgotten the shape of humanity. His limbs spasmed and cracked in directions that defied joint or socket, flinging outward in convulsions that struck the ear with cracking force. His jaw dropped open with a pop, dislocating on both sides, while his throat churned with a slick, pulsing mess that heaved and coiled like something giving birth in reverse. Flesh along his shoulders blackened from the inside out, not burned but hollowed, consumed by a heatless corrosion. His eyes were the first to go. They were boiling in their sockets, rupturing with wet hisses as thick, tar-colored fluid streaked down his cheeks. Then came the sound, not a scream, but a multitonal, bell-chime moan fractured by static, like the dreaming remnants of a failed machine. From his back, a series of tendrils burst out, black and slick, formed a viscous sludge with magnetic sheen, writhing with intelligence and hunger. They slammed into the surrounding floor and walls, sticking, hardening, and retracting in rhythms that felt wrong. Each motion was like a hunting animal testing the air, dragging the creature forward as its spine lengthened and reknit with alien speed. The tendrils formed claws, then drills, then lashed into narrow, spear-like barbs. They pierced a nearby Puritan in the chest, hoisted him skyward, then cracked his body in half with a pull so abrupt I nearly lost my balance. The horror didn't pause. The tendrils retracted and spread the liquefied remains across its torso, absorbing, integrating. Two more Puritans fled, but the thing lunged, dragging its growing bulk across the stone in fluid, rapid jerks. Its structure shifted constantly. It was sometimes like a man-shaped shadow, sometimes like an insect, sometimes like a pile of hardened cables pretending at limbs. It was no longer human. And it didn't care to pretend. The congregation erupted. 50 or more members of the cohort dropped their hoods, revealing masks, plates, visors, lenses, and embedded circuitry. They spread out in a practiced survival instinct, no longer penitents, but weapons called from hiding. We were no longer in a sermon. We were in a war zone. Marcy grabbed my arm. "He was an anchor crown," she said, horror laid flat in her tone. Brask was already moving, pulling a blade from beneath his robes, but too late. The thing that used to be a man exploded outward in a chaos of limbs and cords, tearing tiles from the floor, shrieking in a language the crown warped only remembered in madness. Screams followed. The hall dissolved into motion. Father Rowan did not move. He reached slowly beneath his robe and drew forth a length of cord from around his neck. At its end hung a single object. It was a sliver of dark, smooth metal no longer than a carpenter's nail. No ornament. No aura. Just a dull gleam beneath the incense light. The creature froze. Rowan's voice was soft, almost drowned by the chaos, but I felt it hum in my skull like a tuning fork. "Dreamer, make steady the pattern. Let stillness fall." He stepped forward and drove the nail into the floor with a sharp, deliberate strike. The world stopped. I don't mean the monster. I mean everything. The air thickened like jelly. Sound bled out. My limbs felt like they'd been dipped in resin, every movement trailing a second behind my thoughts. Even the lights dimmed, not flickering, just receding. Drawing in. The anchor crown screamed, or tried to. Its many limbs twitched once, then jerked back, as though something had reeled them in. Its tendrils spasmed midair and froze in place, half-curled like slugs drying in salt. The black gloss on its skin dulled, hardening like oxidized oil. It staggered back, knees locking, torso rising unnaturally straight as its spine tried to reject the motion. Its face contorted into 1,000 expressions in the span of seconds. And still it did not fall. Its mouth moved silently now. Not screaming, but mouthing words. I realized it was repeating itself like it was stuck into a recursive loop trapped in the memory of its failure. Father Rowan stood within the radius, unmoving, shoulders tight. Sweat ran down his face. His hand still gripped the nail. Even he was not immune. His eyes twitched slightly as if he, too, felt the pull of the nail. As if his mind had to fight the undertow of stillness. The cohort didn't move until he finally lifted one finger, the smallest motion, but enough, and touched the creature once. The battle was over. The anchor crown had been stilled. Chapter 15, Aberrant Prayers. As we watched in anticipation and horror, more men of the church began to run from hidden alcoves that none of us, or at least I, had noticed before. Robes snapped sharply as they moved in formation, like a play rehearsed in secret. Their timing was perfect. Not a word was spoken. They flowed around Father Rowan like currents drawn to a single magnetic point. The rest of us, the cohort, were quickly ushered back, away from the dais. Some resisted, standing frozen. Others turned and ran without being told. The truth was already setting in. That thing, that monster, had once sat beside us. It had once whispered prayers with us. It had once been one of us. It hadn't died from the wilds or a failed mission or enemy action. It had failed internally, slipped past some hidden line the church refused to explain. The same line we were all racing against with every passing moment. No one said what would happen to the anchor crown. No one dared ask. Whatever the church intended, it wouldn't be revealed to us. Heretics didn't get answers. Just orders. And without ceremony, we were dismissed. Shoved back down the dim corridors with nothing more than a stern gesture. The sanctuary was locked behind us. The doors thudded shut with finality, the sound vibrating through my ribs like the closing of a crypt. No one spoke much as we walked. There were mumbled fragments. Brask said something about seeing the creature's face in his future dreams. Marcy muttered that she thought the nail would be brighter. She felt as if power should come with spectacle. Most of us didn't say anything at all. The silence was thick and full of questions none of us wanted to ask aloud. When we reached the branching hallway that led toward the dorm blocks, Marcy touched my arm. "You good?" "Fine," I lied. "I just need a minute." She nodded, eyes distant. Brask looked like he wanted to follow, but something in my expression must have warned him off. I wandered alone, following the familiar curves and sharp switchbacks of Horace Yard. The structure had once been part of something larger. It was a transportation node. Ancient illegible signage and a half-dead script still lined some of the walls, corrupted over centuries of grime and corrosion. I passed whole junction rooms and sealed doorways, my footsteps echoing as I followed one particular path. I knew where I was going. It was muscle memory now. Ka'uru's lab sat ducked behind a false wall, disguised with age and mold. The door was ajar and the room empty when I arrived. I didn't knock. Just waited. It didn't take long. The hallway echoed with footsteps, a hunched figure approached and Ka'uru blinked at me through thick lenses. The fluid in his eyes swirled once, reacting to my presence, and I was struck again by how alien he looked when startled. "Oh. Everett. Hello, "My boy. You're back," he said, voice bright despite the sleeplessness in his face. He stepped aside and I followed him into the workshop. It was hotter than I remembered. Alchemical burners flickered across multiple benches, and dense glyph screens hovered in tight configurations around a central slab covered in half-disassembled implanted glands. "Field work," I said, by way of greeting. "Yes. I saw your name on the updated survival logs," he replied cheerfully. "Did you eat well? Lose any limbs? No unusual mutations?" "No more than expected," I said. "We did fine. I even managed a divination." Ka-Uru turned from his work, actual interest flickering in his posture. "Oh? A success?" "First try," I said, a little pride slipping out despite the light. Pedulum guided me. "Pick a vector and read the terrain. You'll surpass me yet," he muttered, returning to his instruments. "And your companions? Still alive?" "Brask is." "Brask." Marcy was vital. Of course she was. "Ka-Uru," I asked slowly, "how do you survive? I mean, out there. Do they ever send you?" He snorted. No. Not in a long time. The church decided long ago that my work was too vital to risk." "Vital?" He smiled, thin and careful. "Indeed. But you're a heretic. Same as us all. Why are you different?" He tapped the edge of a glyph slate with one bony finger. "I have sponsorship." I raised a brow. "From who?" "The Minoris." My breath caught. "Seriously?" "Seriously," he confirmed, but offered no further explanation. I knew better than to press. "Do they protect you?" "They guide me. Sometimes protection is implied. Sometimes it's not." I shifted topics. "I need to understand field wards. Anything I can carry out there. Maybe something that can help hide or protect us while we camp out there." He nodded and retrieved a small, flat slate from his shelves. It hummed faintly in my palm. "Basic wardings for open terrain. Use them when you need a dose of privacy. I have another question about progress. The crown. My understanding bar? How does it advance?" Ka-Uru set down his tools and gave me a look I couldn't quite read. "The prevailing theory," he said slowly, "is that progress doesn't come from knowing more. It comes from acting on it. Cause and effect. Knowledge expressed as action. You must do something with what the Gnosis shows you. That something changes, depending on your alignment and origin." I absorbed that. He added, "Otherwise, you stagnate. The crown calcifies. Eventually, it begins to reject you. Which we saw today." "Good to know," I said grimly. Ka-Uru smiled again. "You'll be fine. Take the slate. Study it. And don't let the sermons rattle you too much. They only get worse." He croaked a laugh that might have been half a cough. I left him in his lab, surrounded by fumes and ancient magic that he treated like houseplants. When I reached my room again, I didn't sit. I cleared a space on the floor, made sure the door was pulled shut, and began to draw the first lines of my domain circle. The chalk sang when I dragged it across the concrete. Not literally, but the sound it made in my head was high and precise, like tension winding itself into geometry. Each curve and notch of the design settled something in me. I'd memorized the pattern from Ka-Uru's books. This time I didn't need speed. I wanted precision. Stillness. My lines converged into a perfect heptagon, nested within a geometric glyph. The concrete beneath my knees was cold and dusty, but I stayed there until it felt sacred. Then I exhaled, pressed my hand flat to the center, and whispered the invocation. The air rippled. Not outward. Not upward. It folded the way paper does when you crease it just right. The lights in my room didn't dim so much as forget they were supposed to glow. My breath steamed. A circle of condensation bloomed around me. The old world peeled back. Columns rose from nothing. Massive, arching things that cracked the idea of scale. They weren't made of stone, not really, instead they were made of implication. Like they'd been dreamed by some worldly power that remembered buildings beyond mortal make. Between them hung veils of red mist, pulsing gently like breath through gauze. A dry, weightless wind curled at my ankles. My domain had no ceiling. No sky. Just height that refused to end. Everything up above dissolved into swirling crimson. The floor was mine, though, circular, perfect, etched in layers of script I hadn't added. Gnosis must have filled them in. I stepped forward, and time slipped. Not much. Not enough to break anything. But the moment stretched. Time here was elastic. I could make a minute into an hour if I didn't stray too far from the anchor. This was the trick Ka-Uru hadn't explained. I think it was my crown that made it clear. The domain was a sanctuary and scaffold. A way to pull time around yourself when the world offered none. I walked slowly, letting the cold red mist part around me. I could finally relax. Truly relax. Within my own domain, it was private in a way nothing else on Terra had ever been. Warded from above, insulated from the eyes that always seemed to follow, I let my shoulders fall. I let the stiffness leave my spine. With a thought, I manifested my throne and a long table beside it. I dropped into the seat, one leg hanging lazily over the side, resting my head against my curled fist like some disdainful king. The moment held. And then the thinking began. It threatened the stability of the domain at first. The raw surge of emotion, the rage and helplessness I'd been shoving down since the mission. But I didn't let it win. I forced it aside, stabilized and anchored myself, then focused again. Warding. That was the true reason I'd come here. Sure, wards would help in the field. Setting a perimeter, warning glyphs, maybe a stalling tactic if something crept too close. But that wasn't what I was chasing. Not really. I wanted to know if warding could be used differently very specifically. I was thinking about the thing in my spine. The bomb. The leash. The kill switch. I knew it was remote triggered, or at least remotely monitored. Every one of us had a countdown in the church it seemed, watched them with clinical precision. But today, during the sermon, that Puritan, the one who convulsed and transformed, somehow he'd hidden his timer. Somehow. That wasn't speculation. Brask and Marcy had said it, and I'd seen the panic in the clergy's movements. They hadn't known he was that close to failure. And that meant one thing: the church's surveillance wasn't absolute. It could be fooled. Masked? Blocked? If he did it, then so could I. But how? I jumped up and started to pace the boundary of my domain, brushing my fingers through the air as if testing for pressure points in the fold of space. The mist curled in sympathy, red and light as dust. Ka'uru's field slate was heavy in my coat pocket, and the symbols on it burned in my mind. Wards weren't just for space, in fact they could be layered. Stacked. The slate's diagram showed this clearly, with layered sigils drawn over one another in rotating spirals, each one keyed to a different frequency of interaction. The notes in Ka'uru's cramped handwriting speculated that most passive monitoring systems, like those used by the church, I hoped, would only scan the outermost layer of biology in the mind. There were footnotes about interference patterns generated by closed loops in the warding's glyphwork. I ran a thumb down the edge of the slate, heart ticking faster. If I could nest a form of nullification ward inside a proximity filter that targeted my spine and feed it just enough false resonance to pass as passive interference, I might be able to mask the leash's pulse from the church. Not forever. Not safely. And this was entirely hypothetically, but maybe just long enough. Could I write one tight enough to mask a bomb's broadcast? Would the effect last? Would it buy me a minute? An hour? It didn't matter. I had to learn how to try. If I could create a ward that could blind the church's view, even temporarily, I could finally start planning real escape routes. Not just from the wilds, but from this entire system of control. The memory of the Puritan's transformation lingered in my mind. That thing had become something else entirely. Black tendrils. Hardening sludge. Weaponized biomass that had devoured his comrades without hesitation. It was horrible, and yet I kept turning back to the timer. He had hidden it. I dropped back into the throne and stared up into the swirling red. The mist stirred slightly as I watched, slower than wind, thicker than smoke. I sat for a long time, that was only a moment, thinking and trying to put the pieces together. Then something shifted beneath the mist. Far below, barely perceptible at first, a knot began to form. Like a clot of denser crimson, it pulsed once, then grew. It didn't rise so much as extend, pushing up from the depths in a slow, deliberate ascent. I leaned forward without realizing, eyes narrowed. The clot stretched upward, becoming more like a stalk or column, but it was too irregular. It undulated with sluggish force, forming branches or ribs or veins, whatever it was I couldn't tell. It was still distant, but rising fast. I stood and moved to the very edge of my domain's anchored floor, where the sigils hummed gently beneath my boots. It would pass close. Close enough to reach. I didn't know what it was, not yet. But it wasn't random. It wasn't natural. It was some intrusion into my space, maybe from the outer void of the domain, or perhaps some result of my own thoughts bleeding too hard into the gnosis fabric. Still, I felt no fear. Not here. Not in my space. I extended my hand, steadying my breath. The mist shivered around my fingers. I didn't know what drove me to do it. Maybe it was the compass crown, or something in the way the mist pulsed like a vein stretched too thin. The thing was rising, self-installing, like a pipe searching for its next connection point. But it wasn't aimed at me. It was crawling upward, not veering or turning, just climbing. I knew it would pass me by if I did nothing. So I reached out. Fingers first. Ginger, cautious. Like touching a live cable without knowing if it was grounded. My skin brushed the edge of it. It shuddered. A ripple moved down its length. It didn't halt its climb, but the rhythm faltered, like a heartbeat skipping a beat before correcting. The material was warm, dense, almost organic. My finger sank in slightly. Not wet, but not dry either. Something in it noticed me. Not a mind. Not a presence. Just a reflex. Like muscle memory in a limb that had never been mine. My own domain wavered in response, the sigils dimming then flaring. But nothing broke. I was still anchored. The structure continued rising, the place where I'd touched it now glowing faintly, as if tagged. I stepped back and watched it, curling and thickening like some embryonic tower bleeding into the world from below. It kept going, if I didn't interfere. The compass crown pulsed softly at the back of my head, and somewhere deep I didn't let it go. I reached with both hands and grasped the thing fully, a firm, living thing, and it was slick with pulsing warmth. The instant I hauled, it reacted. The whole tower body jerked violently, tendrils flaring outward in ragged arcs as I yanked it down through the base of the mist into my domain. It tore loose like a root system being unearthed and screamed. It was not sonically, but through the sensation of pressure and rupture that hit me with a wet pop like a nosebleed in my skull. It landed with a wet, sickening slap onto the glyph-etched floor. Blood sprayed, if that's what it was. Dark crimson, too thick to run properly, it slopped outward and hissed against the outer etching lines and steamed. I stumbled backward, already climbing onto the table beside my throne, boots leaving red streaked prints across its glassy surface. The pillar's tip had widened in transit. Now it bulged, pulsated, then cracked. A series of muscular contractions began at the base, rippling upward. The top split like the seam of an overripe fruit. From it a man was birthed, a human man. He landed in a crumpled sack of membrane. Translucent. Bloodied. Gasps tore from his lungs before the sack had even stopped emptying fluids. Mewling, twitching. Naked, raw, steaming in the domain's air. Whatever he had been before entering, if he'd even existed, was now gone. He clawed free of the film, slowly tearing at it, like a newborn that had never known the womb. He sputtered fluid, dragging himself onto his knees with a pained effort. His eyes found mine and widened with a fervent light that twisted something in my chest. "Are you a guardian of the gate?" he breathed, trembling. Then he bowed, arms stretched out before him in the thick, steaming blood. "Will you divulge the will of the Great Three? It took everything I had to get here. The fuel for our ritual is spent." I stood frozen on the table, blood slowly drying on my boots, unsure what I had done or what I had let in. Whatever this was, it wasn't part of Ka-Ur-U's notes. I swallowed, heart ticking loud in the quiet mist. He looked at me like I was holy, like I was something sacred. Something above him. Not for the first time, I cursed the church for all it kept from us. Whoever this was, he knew of powers the clergy never mentioned. The three. The gate. He was looking at me like I was a compass pointing him forward. I had no plan. But cause and effect, right? That was the key to advancement, wasn't it? So I straightened, masked my hesitation with disdain, and played the role I never asked for. After all, if he worshipped the Archons, he couldn't be a good person, right? I decided in that moment, hasty as it was, to try to use him to my advantage. Time to put that theater class from freshman year to use. I hated playing Tybalt in high school, but right now, I was glad for it. Mist curled around me as I vanished from his view and reappeared in my throne, leaning sideways, lounging like a tyrant. My foot left a drip trail across the floor. "I may be penitent," I said, voice slow, layered with quiet power. The mist deepened, swirling beneath me like a theater curtain drawn low. It was a weak opener, but I was thinking on the fly. His eyes bulged with awe. He began crawling forward, slapping his palms into blood as he moved. "I seek the gate of the three, O Holy One. By your will, the ritual brought me here. Are you the one meant to guide seekers of the true three?" He was buying it. Completely. I could almost feel the lie solidify under my words. I leaned forward, letting the mist draw around him like a crown of steam. "You seek those weaklings? And yet you've climbed so high? Look where you've managed to bring yourself." He shuddered, stammering with adulation, higher than the three? "Yes, indeed. I am something new. Something that is growing." He was shaking with adrenaline or belief or both. "Why you will still help me? If I find you interesting enough," I said, letting my words drift like incense. "I assume you climbed this far to consult the three below me?" He collapsed forward in supplication. Why, as you are correct, "O Great One, I beseech thee, tell me your identity, if I may be so bold ed." I smirked, blood dripping down from my feet onto the dais of my throne. "Impudent." He flinched and tremored. "Do not worry, little one. I enjoy your boldness." With a flick of my fingers, a simple stone chair grew beside the glyph ring, wrought from mist and suggestion. It startled him more than anything so far. Wide-eyed, he crawled into it like it was a trap. "You ask what I am," I said. "The best way you mortals understand would be to call me a fetus. And as such, you may address me so. I am the will that comes next." The domain trembled. My words struck the layer of reality with a hum I hadn't intended. But it worked. The man bowed again, so deep his forehead smeared the blood on the floor. I watched him breathe, shuddering with awe, and felt the impossible stakes building behind the theater. Something real had begun as he climbed into his chair at my motion behest. He raised his head slowly, eyes locked on me with hunger, but it was not for flesh, but for answers. "You know them, don't you? The three? What are they truly? What sits behind their masks and words?" I tilted my head with deliberate slowness, as if annoyed by the question. In truth, I had no idea. The Church had never spoken of the three, not directly. They spoke of the dreamer, of schema, of penance and cycles, but the Archons remained cloaked in vagary, fragments I'd picked up from offhand remarks. Still, I didn't blink. "They are detritus," I said, voice cold. "Unworthy of the height you've reached." His mouth opened in silent disbelief. I saw it work around unspoken protests, the fear of blasphemy clogging his tongue. "The rituals we performed," he whispered, "they were designed to draw the attention of the three. My faction, that is, we've worked generations in the outer holdings of the Keel Authority. We found the scraps of rites long forbidden. We pieced together the path. Our leaders, the warlocks and tacticians, they spent our hoarded essence, our tools, our lives, just to send me here. I was the chosen. I am the most pious of my kin. The only one willing to offer everything." He was shaking now, hands balled to fists on the armrests of the chair I'd summoned. He leaned forward. "We need to know the paths of Gnosis. The Keel must have a guide in that truth. We assumed this was the three. We are willing to pay any price." "Any?" The domain shuddered. "Not because of me, not entirely." His words carried weight. A vow, spoken truly, vibrated in the substrate. It rippled through the wards, through the mist, like a tuning fork struck against my bones. I felt it in the soles of my feet. I leaned forward from the throne, letting the silence stretch between us. The domain had not yet quieted, it resonated faintly, as if the words the man had spoken were still hanging in the mist, echoing into places I couldn't see. My face remained calm, but inwardly, thoughts ran jagged. If he was serious, and it seemed the domain believed he was, then he had just offered more than himself. He had offered a connection. I let my voice drop, low and sonorous. "Then I accept." His eyes went wide. "Your faction will be acknowledged. Their strengths are noted. Their desperation has earned them one favor. From me." He swallowed hard, face blood-slick and reverent. "But no more blind reaching," I said. "If they seek answers, they must send questions. If they seek truth, they must offer clarity. One cannot beg and lead. I will not waste my patience." He nodded rapidly, eyes stinging from tears or residue. "Why yes, fetus. Of course." I raised my hand, and the mist thickened behind him, forming a loop of chain that slid down gently over his shoulders, locking around the stone chair like an embrace. The script glowed faintly. "Not to bind him in pain but in place. In the memory of my domain. Take a name for our pact," I said. "One you will wear only when summoned. Speak it now and bind yourself." He flinched as the chain pulsed. He took a breath that rattled deep in his lungs and whispered, "Severance." I nodded. The mist accepted it. His new name hung like a glyph in the space behind his head. "Then it is done. Next time I call you, Severance, you will receive the answers you hunger for. But only if I find you useful. Pray your kin do not disappoint." He bowed again, trembling and joyful. I exhaled, stepped down from the throne, and let the domain recede. The mist folded. The crimson light faded. My room returned around me like waking from a dream. My eyes were bleeding again and my head throbbed from the overuse of domain magic, but I smiled despite myself. A new tool had entered my repertoire, and though I had to play God to make it work, the man who was Severance now he was mine to use. He wanted knowledge. I could trade that, in measured doses, for information on the Archons, the Keel Authority, leveraging the converted saints, and uncovering all the truths the Church hid from me. I wiped the blood from my face and lay down, still smiling. This tool that had fallen into my lap might be the best thing to happen to me yet.